Am I on the air? Are we on the air? We're on the air. It's a good thing, right? This is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127, and we are actually on the air. We have a couple of guests tonight, but before we get to our guests, let me mention, as I generally do, that if you want to comment on anything that you hear on this show, good, bad, or indifferent, whatever comments you want to make, or you want to get in touch with me or join my mailing list, the thing to do is to go to my website, Fader Files, FEDERFILES.com. And you'll get all sorts of information about books I've written, including a recent one, about essays, other radio work I do and have done, all kinds of things. And get yourself on my mailing list. And if you want to, blow off some steam about anything you heard here tonight, or let me know about something, feel free to do that. So let's get to our first guest. Obviously, what we're talking about a lot these days is the fact that we seem to be jackboot marching ourselves right into a kind of corporate fascism in this country. We have somebody on here who has been on before, Peter Van Buren, who is an author, a blogger, and was a longtime employee of the State Department until he ran into some trouble with them. He was a whistleblower, actually, and blew the whistle on waste and mismanagement during Iraq Reconstruction. And he wrote a book about it, and he was on here after his book. It's called We Meant Well. This is the first book, We Meant Well, How I Helped Lose the Battle for the Hearts and Minds of the Iraqi People, which is a terrific book. And you should read this book. He's a very good writer, knows what he's talking about, and also has a sense of irony that makes it even more readable. And here he is with us. Hi.
It's great to be with you today.
Yeah, and also I wanted to mention that Peter Van Buren has a new book coming up. It will be out, is it in March?
Yes, in the spring, in March.
Okay, it'll be coming out in March, and the book is called Ghosts of Tom Joad, A Story of the 99%. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about the book that's coming out.
Absolutely. We're going to take a look at another way that the United States has changed really over the course of our lifetimes, and that is the dilution of our middle class, the end of industrialization, the rise of the working poor, what conveniently is called the 1% and the 99%. And the book, which takes its title from the great masterpiece of the Depression, Grapes of Wrath, looks at these issues and tries to explain how we got to where we are today economically. How did Detroit go from the industrial capital of the world to a bombed-out landscape that is barely inhabited? And how did we lose what we had after World War II, one of the strongest societies in the world? And it weaves politics and economics and some sociology together to try to take a comprehensive look at how the United States got from the prosperity of 1945 to the very difficult situation economically that many people face today in 2013.
Interesting you picked Tom Joad, of course, for many reasons, but Tom Joad was a man who was, physical in his activism, put it that way, against the boss, the man, the corporation, and injustice.
Absolutely. And the character in the book, the main character in the book, weaves in and out of Tom Joad's fictional life and starts at the book beginning without really understanding much about what's happening to him and the economy around him. But over the course of a lifetime, really, begins to understand that these things did not happen by accident. There's no invisible hand. It wasn't just some economic mistake that happened. There was a conscious decision in the United States, a series of decisions, that actually redid our economies to become something more extractive. Once upon a time, there was a sense that while not everybody could have everything, everybody could have something.
Or enough.
Pardon?
At least enough.
Enough. And it was not played as a zero-sum game. You could make some money, I could make some money. Certainly the boss made more money. But it was all in some sense of balance. What we have now is closer to a zero-sum game where people at the top, so-called 1%, believe that as long as there's anything down there worth taking, it's coming from their pockets. And so they're reaching for a conclusion that literally has not been seen in this country since the days of slavery, where they have it all, and we have nothing.
That really is the end of the continuum of their point of view, and the reigning point of view in the country is basically slavery. I mean, that's if you gave them free reign, get rid of the minimum wage, workers' protections, or whatever it is that they're trying to unload all the time and get rid of. Basically, what they're aiming straight at is a kind of slavery again. So we'll talk about the book more when it comes out, but that is what's happening. But for now, you wrote a very interesting article, and I urge everybody to go check this article out on one of my favorite websites called Tom Dispatch, TomDispatch, Tom Dispatch. Check it out online. And the article written by Mr. Van Buren here is, Welcome to Post-Constitution America. What if your country begins to change and no one notices it? And I'd like to just go through the article, almost like page by page, and we can talk about, what you've written here. What fascinates me is, and I didn't know this, I'm not saying that like that's an amazing thing, but I didn't know this before. I'm going to read this. On July 30th, 1778, the Continental Congress created the first whistleblower protection law, stating, quote, that it is the duty of all persons in the service of the United States to give the earliest information to Congress or other proper authority of any misconduct, frauds, or misdemeanors committed by any officers or persons in the service of these states. I never heard of that before.
It's very interesting, and it actually predates the Constitution. I'm playing a little loose with the title for some dramatic effect, but
sure.
In fact, it predates our Constitution. From the earliest days, the Founding Fathers were thinking this stuff through and realized that if the citizens did not police the government, then the government would turn around and police the citizens. And so they built into the system, almost philosophically, this concept that people have an obligation. It's not just sort of, hey, it's a good idea. It is an obligation to point out government malfeasance and misconduct and pass that on so that the rest of us can make decisions and take actions based on it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, the way I discovered that, and I have to admit that I, too, did not know that going into the researching this article, was I was doing some searching on the date of Bradley Manning's conviction. And he was convicted on July 30th, 2013, and it turns out that it was July 30th, 1778, that with some sense of historical irony, our forefathers, the Founding Fathers, wrote that about whistleblowers.
Amazing.
So the idea about studying history to know what goes on in the future is a very valid piece of advice.
Interesting, you do mention obligation. In fact, it literally says duty. And when people think of the word duty generally these days, especially since they hype up the military all the time, people in combat or people in the service of the American government say that they have a duty, an honor and a duty, etc. But a duty, right? But here it says, and this is like you say, it predates the Constitution. It's the duty of all persons in the service of the United States to give information about, malfeasance in government. So, and by extension, I would say to people that it's the duty of citizens to do this too. And this is where we run into Bradley Manning and to Snowden. But Manning was an employee directly of the military, a member of the military. Snowden, a subcontracted employee or sometime employee of the government, right?
Well, this is very interesting because a lot of the less informed commentators out there are constantly barking about Snowden's oath or Manning's oath or those types of things when they talk about why those guys should, Snowden should hop on a plane and fly back to the United States. And they use words like oath and commission fairly casually. But in fact, as you've pointed out, these things exist in layers. And the overriding oath, the greatest thing that a U.S. government employee swears to when he or she takes a job, is to the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
The oath that you take, the oath that I took as a federal employee, that Bradley Manning took, that any person in government service today, is that you swear allegiance to the Constitution and you agree to protect it against all enemies, foreign or domestic. And those are very important words. I suspect that most federal employees just kind of mumble along and can't wait to get on to the snacks and the drinks after the ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
And I suspect that people who on Fox News and everything else who talk about Manning's oath and Snowden's oath really don't pay much attention to the text of those oaths and what they really mean. And they don't say you have an oath to an administration, that you have an oath to the Patriot Act, that you have an oath to the NSA or the Army or
a flag or a flag.
Or a flag.
Yeah.
No, you have an oath to not only a document, which is technically what the Constitution is, but an idea. And that idea embodied in the Constitution is that the people are to be protected from the government.
Mm-hmm.
It's very straightforward, and historically, back to the Founding Fathers again, they wrote the Bill of Rights in specific response to terrible things that the British occupiers had done to them.
And
I think
go ahead.
One to focus on here today for our purposes, of course, is the Fourth Amendment, which guarantees Americans against unreasonable search and seizure, and, lesser known, specifically rules out the concept of general warrant. General warrants were issued by the British back in the occupation days, and they were things like, we can search any house that has a Patriot in it, or we can search any house in Newark, or things like that. They were very broad permissions, if you will, that made it all quite legal. What the NSA has done through some manipulation of words, and basically because they could, is bring back the concept of general warrant, that they can search anyone's email if there's a connection to terrorism, or they can search all Americans' emails looking for whatever they're looking for. And this is specifically in violation of the words of the Constitution, and it's through that I have come to the conclusion, as written in my article, that we have entered an era of post-constitutional America. Well,
it's absolutely frightening, of course. And it's interesting, just to go back to the words, it says foreign and domestic. And when we're thinking about enemies domestic, these days, sadly, but truly, we have to look at the real enemies of the Constitution. That's part of the oath that the people are swearing to. The real enemies of the Constitution these days are not Mr. Snowden and Mr. Manning and anybody who stands out on the street and protests. The real enemies of the Constitution, and I'm not being some sort of leftist, this is not leftist hyperbole, are the people who are destroying the Constitution, and that would be our own government.
Absolutely. And of course, the irony that the Constitution is put in place to limit the powers of government is one of those things that historians will shake their heads over when they talk about the decline of the United States during our generation. The idea here is very straightforward. Over the last 12 years, since 9/11, the United States government has decided that it has the authority to choose which parts of the Constitution to uphold and which parts of the Constitution to ignore, and under what circumstances. If the word terrorist is applied to a person, that seems to negate their constitutional rights in significant amounts. The Constitution is a fairly simple, the Bill of Rights, I should say, is a very simple document. You could probably get it all onto 2 or 3 typed pages. Mm-hmm. And Barack Obama, who was a constitutional law professor, I assume has read the document, as have I. And there's nothing in it that mentions exceptions. There's no exception for terrorists. There's no exception for anarchists, communists, bad people, people who are mean to dogs and babies. There's no exceptions. The beauty of the Constitution is that it applies equally, or should apply equally, to everyone. Mm-hmm. And that is what's being trod upon by our government today.
Well, let's go through the article here, and you can describe what you see as evidence of a post-constitutional America. On the first page here, it says the first caption heading is "The weapons of war come home." Maybe you could elucidate.
This is part of the idea that the post-constitutional America was developed on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. And to begin my argument that we've entered this era, I just very quickly review that the tools of surveillance that are being turned against us now were all built and tested in Iraq and Afghanistan. The NSA was present and is present in Afghanistan, was present in the Iraq War, and developed some technologically amazing, I have to give them props for their technical skills, ways of manipulating the Iraqi cell phone system to track people, to identify phones as hardware so that they can track the physical movement of a phone, to use the phones as a two-way communication device, to spy on people, to turn on webcams remotely, to download what we would consider malware or spyware into things. Just extraordinary technological achievements.
You also mentioned that it includes false cell towers, which capture cell phones.
Yeah, including a technique called with faking a cell phone tower, which the FBI has now moved home here to the United States. They give it a fancy name. They call it Stingray. And it basically is a electronic fake cell phone tower that picks up information, monitors it, filters it, does things with it, and then passes it on to a normal cell phone tower. So the caller has no idea that this has all been done to him or her.
Basically, it's basically tapping cell phone signals. But how do you know this?
This information has slipped out in little pieces and dribbles, and if the people go to the article at Tom Dispatch or the other places it's been posted, there's links to most of my sources. One way that people who are interested in this kind of thing can sometimes get a little bit ahead of the curve is by looking through the websites of the companies that make these hardware tools. Often they're bragging about how good they are. And many of these companies not only sell these tools to our spies, but also to foreign governments who are interested in spying on their own people. So contractors' websites are a good place to look. Keeping your eyes on employment boards that advertise for classified jobs often will reference a particular technology. You may not know what it is, but there'll be a name. It'll say Stingray, technicians wanted, top secret clearance required. And with that name, you can look around a little bit. If you have some people to talk to, you could say, "Hey, what's going on with Stingray?" And oftentimes, you can piece together a puzzle. The thing that is frightening about this, and I list some other technologies, and I don't think we have time to go through them all in detail because I'm a kind of a gearhead at best, and would love to talk. But,
that's okay. Go ahead.
You have to apply to this what I call the cockroach theory. You know, every cockroach you see on the kitchen floor, there's probably 7 more hidden away.
At least.
At least. And that's the same thing. The technologies that an idiot like me can track down through some research on the internet have got to be just the tiny little bits and pieces that have slipped out, that are old, that are practically of little value to the NSA or the FBI anymore. It's reasonable, I think, to assume there's a lot more going on that we don't know. Edward Snowden has added significantly to our knowledge of what the NSA has been doing, and hopefully there'll be whistleblowers and patriots who continue to do that.
Now, he's upholding his real oath to the Constitution and revealing that people in our own government, actually the people who run the government, are the domestic enemies that we have to watch out for. Now, you mentioned that some of the things available to the NSA, as revealed by Mr. Snowden, are information including credit card transactions, air ticket purchases, financial records, et cetera, et cetera. But then you move on to something else, which is in some ways as scary, maybe just because it's more physical and dramatic. And let me just read this paragraph here. When the U.S. wanted something in Iraq or Afghanistan, they sent guys to kick down doors and take it. This too may be the beginning to happen here at home. Recently, despite other valuable and easily portable objects lying nearby, computers and only computers were stolen from the law offices representing State Department whistleblower Aurelia Fedinism. Similarly, a Washington law firm representing an NSA whistleblower, Tom Drake, had computers and only computers stolen from its office. What you're saying also is that the techniques of warfare, not just the NSA techniques, but the actual ethic and technique of warfare, of pure aggression and disregard for any kind of rights at all, is being brought home and used domestically, correct?
Absolutely. It's not just the physical tools, but it's also the techniques. When the U.S. had something that what they wanted to get hold of in Iraq or Afghanistan or any place else around the world where we're running our ops, you have people whose job it is to go get that. Sometimes they do it very overtly for a purpose, kick down doors, make a lot of noise, and sometimes they do it very quietly in hopes that the person doesn't even know it's been taken or it's been altered or copied. Those techniques have come home here as well, and the FBI and the NSA and others continue to employ them here. These things are frightening, and they are things that chip away at the fundamentals of our society and democracy. But I think the thing that's come home from the war that is most chilling and will have the longest lasting effects are the new concepts of quote-unquote justice that were developed during the War of Terror. Bradley Manning's case is a perfect example. Just like the guys in Gitmo right now, Manning was picked up off the battlefield and kept in a cage in Kuwait for a while. His sleep cycle was purposely reversed and then reversed again. His food and water were controlled. He was isolated from people. He was subject to all the deprivations that have become common ways of softening up the bad guys on their way to Guantanamo. Manning then came back to the United States, where he was thrown into a Marine brig where he was subject to regular sleep deprivation as well as sensory deprivation, tools that are in use in Guantanamo and at the black sites. And he was kept under these conditions for 3 years. There was no pretrial process allowed him. There were no rights allowed him. They simply locked him up and perhaps hoped that people would forget about it and he would just disappear as the Guantanamo detainees basically have. When Manning was allowed, and I stress the word allowed, to come to trial, what happened out at Fort Meade, Maryland, was almost a parody of justice. No transcripts were released. Documents that were filed with the court, unclassified documents, were never publicly allowed out. Whenever a witness wanted to say something secret, he or she could go into a closed session. Reporters were harassed by the military, press credentials denied. The concept of an open trial was turned on its head. The military judge who was presiding, and with some irony, military judges preside over the so-called trials at Guantanamo, ruled consistently against the defense on nearly every motion. Mm-hmm. This was a parody of justice and a parody of the protections allowed under the Fifth Amendment, the due process things.
What amazed... I'm sorry to interrupt you, but by the way, if you just tuned in, you're listening to Peter Van Buren, who worked for a long time for the State Department and left under circumstances where he was basically accused by the State Department of, turning on them and going against the United States interests. And he essentially blew the whistle on waste and mismanagement during Iraq Reconstruction. And this is in this book. It's an extremely good book. And once again, I urge you to buy this book. It's called We Meant Well, How I Helped to Lose the Battle, How I Helped Lose the Battle for the Hearts and Minds of the Iraqi People. And the other thing I found astounding about the Manning trial, in addition to everything else you've talked about turning justice on its head, is that the commander-in-chief of the Army, and Bradley Manning is in the Army, the commander-in-chief, his commander-in-chief, the highest authority in the country, in two ways for him. He's an American citizen, he's the highest executive in the country, and he's a member of the Army. So the commander-in-chief, he said he more or less said outright that the man was guilty before trial.
Oh, he said it literally in those words. And
so how could he have a fair trial in the United States of America if the commander-in-chief said he's guilty already?
The commander-in-chief said it. The Pentagon made public statements, quote, leaking is the same as aiding the enemy. It was just a pretense of fairness. I mean, almost, like I said, almost a parody of justice. And this, of course, renders the president's remarks on Friday saying that Edward Snowden should come back to the United States where he would have a fair trial.
Oh, absolutely.
Due process.
Sure.
How the guy can say that with a straight face, impresses me. Again, props for the technical skills, while my stomach turns over at the content of what he said.
You know how he can say it, I think, my opinion. My opinion is that you read much Shakespeare? You know,
Some.
Because in Macbeth, it's a famous part of Macbeth where he is killing and murdering and overthrowing, legal authority all over the place, and basically just turned into a murderer and the worst kind of person. And at one point, he has to make a decision whether or not to do some other atrocious thing. And he says, and I'm, of course, I'm paraphrasing. He says, he compared it to being crossing a river. He said, a stream. He said, I'm halfway across already. And what difference does it make if I go back or go forward?
Yep.
And that's the way I look at Obama. He is so, and he said, I'm so steeped in blood that it makes no difference if I go backwards or forwards at this point. So onward. You know what I mean?
I think you're actually being kind to him, connecting him to at least a Shakespearean character, because my thought would be something more along the lines of a sociopath. Mm-hmm. We faced this week. We also saw the horrific trial in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with this, where this horrible man, Ariel Castro, held 3 young women hostage in his basement for years, abused them over and over again over a period of years, and they finally, after some of them 10 years, escaped. When he got called into court and asked to explain himself, he said that he really hadn't done much wrong, that these folks had voluntarily submitted to him, and in fact, there's really not much that he had to explain. Mm-hmm. And that, in fact, is the way a sociopath justifies his actions. It really, in his mind, doesn't seem like a bad thing to wiretap all American citizens, in fact, as much of the world as you possibly can, to do away with due process when it's inconvenient for the government, whether that's Bradley Manning's trial or what goes on at Guantanamo, and ultimately, under the Obama administration, to take it to the ultimate level, and that is to actually murder an American citizen. The Due Process Clause, the Fifth Amendment, states unambiguously that the government cannot take away liberty, property, or life without due process, giving you a chance to defend yourself, to understand why this is happening to you. Mm-hmm. In the case of at least 5 American citizens that the Obama administration proudly admits to assassinating, the most celebrated of which is Anwar al-Awlaki, the American citizen who went to Yemen and became an al-Qaeda propagandist. He was assassinated with a drone. And then a few days later, the Obama administration sent a drone after al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son, also in Yemen. We've actually crossed the river several times, in Macbeth's sense. We've crossed it, come back, done it a few times, and then, picked up and walked across the third time. When we're actually to the point where essentially the government is bragging about its ability to locate an errant American citizen in the middle of the Yemen desert and smite him. That's why I come to the conclusion that we have, in fact, reached the horrendous state of post-constitutional America.
I think that Americans have every right to be, and this is, again, not left-wing hyperbole or anything. I think everybody has a right, every citizen, right, left, middle, whoever they are, has a right to be very, very worried that these, as we see, the NSA has brought their spying home to the United States.
Wait, Mike, yeah. I have to stop you.
Yeah.
Because many people say you're wrong because they say if I've got nothing to hide, I've got nothing to worry about.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, that is a fool's way of looking at things. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about. Well, in fact, maybe you don't have anything to hide, at least as you define it today. Mm-hmm. But once you unleash these tools of surveillance and oppression, they become just tools that can be picked up and used by a variety of people in a variety of ways.
Well, here, you mentioned one thing in your article. There's something I think that some people probably don't know about. An Obama administration insider threat program, it's called, requires federal employees, including the Peace Corps, to report on the suspicious behavior of coworkers. This is just East Germany or Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union.
Absolutely. The Nazis were extremely, and the Russians as well, were terrific, if you will, about telling children in school to report on their parents, and telling workers at their job sites to report on their fellow workers. And what happened is that once people, the very simple fact of economics is people do what they are incentivized to do. If I pay you money to paint my house, and give you a lot of money, you're going to paint my house. If I pay you more if you do a good job, you'll probably do a good job. That's basic human nature, if you will, beyond economics. And so if you create a program inside government where you reward people for turning in their coworkers for un-American, suspicious activities, well, guess what? They're going to do it. They're going to find excuses to do it. Never mind the fight you had with the new guy in human resources. Instead of just delaying your paycheck a couple of days, he might turn you in. He might say that, hey, I've seen this guy doing X, Y, or Z.
Well, I heard him say something in Arabic the other day. He might be a terrorist.
Really?
Yeah.
Arabic.
This is where we are.
That almost pretty much nails it down. I think under the Obama rules, you may be able to just actually shoot him right there.
Well, I guess you'd have to watch out in the commissary if you order hummus. But you mentioned something else here. It says, thanks to the Patriot Act, citizens, even librarians, can be served by the FBI with a national security letter, not requiring a court order, demanding records and other information and gagging them from revealing to anyone that such information has been demanded or a letter delivered. Really?
One of the insidious things, many insidious things that was built into the Patriot Act is the ability of the government to cover its tracks, if you will. A national security letter is not a warrant, not a court order. It's simply a letter that is literally typed by the FBI demanding something from you. They can go to your employer and say, we need to see his financial records, or go to your doctor and ask to see your latest session with the psychiatrist. And these people not only have to produce those records, but in fact, under the Patriot Act, are prohibited from telling you that they were asked to show those.
Very much the way the phone companies were ordered not to reveal that they were told to tap everybody's phones, right?
And that's what's happened in these 12 years is the escalation of these things. What started out as a national security letter saying we're going to go ask Mike's librarian what books he takes out has morphed into something larger, where we're going to ask Verizon for subscriber data on all of its 50 million customers, or we're going to ask Google for the search terms that every person in the United States has used. And we're going to also put a gag order on you saying that you not only can't tell Peter Van Buren that the government asked for his search terms, we're not going to even allow Google to tell the United States that they've been asked at all. And they're not even allowed to give aggregate numbers. We had 75 trillion requests or things like that. Nothing. It's all secret. It's all being done behind the curtain. And the Americans who think they have nothing to hide will someday, not too long from now, be very surprised about what the government has found hidden. Hello?
Yeah.
Hi, this is Peter.
Yeah, can you? Looks like my microphone went dead here. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I don't know why it went dead. All I can say is I have no idea. But I'm not allowed to tell why it went dead. Actually, I do know, but I've been ordered not to tell why it went dead. So, but and one other thing I wanted to something in your article here. You say in the last decade, 10 times as many employers turn to FBI criminal databases to screen job applicants. Really?
Absolutely. And it's not just the jobs you think about. We'll leave aside how successful that strategy was with Edward Snowden for a second. But it's not just for jobs that have classifications with them, or federal jobs, or jobs, say, for teachers where you wouldn't want a pedophile in that position. But in fact, everyday jobs. As part of the research for the book we talked about, Ghosts of Tom Joad, I spent a lot of time working in the minimum wage economy. And I worked at several large retail stores, like Walmart. And those employers do criminal background checks. I applied at a small arts and crafts store who did a criminal background check and a drug test before they hired me to stock shelves.
Really? To stock shelves? So this is apropos to what you were saying before. Is if you have nothing to hide or you didn't think you did anything wrong, don't worry. Now what we're talking about here is crossing into that area.
Absolutely, because what happens with a criminal check is that it's kind of a one-way thing. In other words, the store that's like Walmart sends my name and identifying information to a computer somewhere, and the computer comes back and says, "Here's the record." There's no real ability or interest, I guess, on the part of anybody to verify the accuracy of all that, and you, the only person who really can verify the accuracy, never get to see any of that. So they send in your name, and the computer comes back and says, the guy's got 7 drunk driving convictions, and Walmart says, "Thank you so much for your application, but we're unable to offer you a position at this time." You don't know why. You don't know what happened. You don't know what those records show. Maybe those were somebody else's. Maybe they were things that were supposedly taken off your record. Maybe they're inaccurate entries, because the FBI, of course, doesn't drive around from city to city asking if anybody's been arrested today. They rely on local police to funnel these reports up to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, if a cop in my hometown gets on the wrong side and sends my name to the FBI, and I apply for a job at Walmart a year from now, and I get rejected, I may not know why, and it may be because of that. And so even the people who still insist, despite all the information we've tried to share with them, that they've got nothing to hide, should keep an eye on things, because there's always something.
This also violates a basic tenet of justice in this country, which is that you have a right to confront your accusers and to know what the accusers are saying about you. That right is taken away by this kind of behavior. Let me ask you this, Peter Van Buren.
Sure.
Are we being? I wonder sometimes if this conversation we're having and conversations like this, does this sound incredibly naive? And foolish? I mean, are we just being idealistic, sort of, I don't know what. We're having a little conversation here about what the ideal of the Constitution is. Should we toughen up and get to know what it's like in the real world now? Do we sound foolish and childish for having this kind of conversation?
Those kind of things always go through my mind, and I do have a tendency to start talking kind of in philosophical terms about these things.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, this is the real world. And the ideas of the Constitution, as theoretical as they can be on one plane, translated some very real things in our lives. Our ability to access a variety of media sources, our ability to conduct our lives in private, our ability to get a job, to board an airplane. These are very practical, real-world things that these theoretical issues affect absolutely directly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's possible to talk about them in glorious, glowing terms and sound like, your high school social studies teacher. But when you get turned down for a job, when you can't board an airplane, when the bank says they're not going to be able to help you with a mortgage, when these things start to happen, you've got to start to realize that these protections in the Constitution are not just for hippie bomb-throwing, drug-using freaks.
Mm-hmm.
They're there for all of us.
So where would you, and this is something I have to ask everybody who comes on, and I think we're probably going to have to go and take a break now and move on.
Sure.
But once again, let me remind people, you should check this book out. It's called We Meant Well, How I Helped Lose the Battle for the Hearts and Minds of the Iraqi People. And Peter's next book, Peter Van Buren, will be The Ghosts of Tom Joad, that's Joad, who is the hero of The Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck's great book, which should be taught in every high school in the country.
Absolutely.
A story of the 99%. This will be available this coming spring. All right, we're going to take a break now. Thanks for coming on. But the last question I'll ask you is this, which I'm sort of forced to ask after asking the question about do we sound naive, is, so what do we do about it? Obviously, voting for one or another of the candidates or one senator or another doesn't make any difference. So what do we do?
It's a tough question to answer, and if I had a 30-second response to you, I'd go out and run for something myself.
And I'd vote for you.
Well, thank you. There's one. You start by understanding the scope of the problem. Unfortunately, far too many Americans simply do not believe what is happening around them. They see it. The newspapers, the media is not shy about telling us these stories. The government itself brags about its capabilities and its actions. And yet, people will say, well, it doesn't really matter to me. I don't really care. It doesn't affect me personally. Yeah, my kid who's always out there doing this Occupy stuff, I guess maybe it matters a little to him. But hey, I just go to work, come home, and that's that. And those folks are sleepwalking us, the country, into this. The other thing I think that we need to do is we have to get past this left and right thing. This is an illusion. This is a way of distracting people. Every time anything happens, the left says it's the right's fault and the right says it's the left's fault, and the whole thing is sort of brushed off as another political scuffle. And, for example, I don't want to get into the whole Benghazi thing, but I mean, that's basically whatever happened in Benghazi got swallowed up by both sides pointing fingers at each other, and pretty soon, the issue moved on. My politics has shifted, and this may be a place for all of us to consider starting, away from left and right and thinking more about up and down. And if you start from that premise and people come to the conclusions that our Constitution has been trod upon and is in danger, that sets the stage for whatever actions are going to be necessary to restore our country, to bring it back to where it was, and to make it a place where we all want to live again.
All right. Thank you very much. We're gonna take a break now. Thanks, Peter.
My pleasure, and call me anytime. Okay.
Thank you very much. We'll take a break, and we'll be back. Okay, we're back, and we have a call, do we? Yes. Jason, you're on, Jason.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey.
I just want to compliment the guest that you had on. I think it's incredibly important that people understand what's going on here. And this really is not being covered by the press, from my opinion, in the extent that it should be. I mean, this is draconian, drastic, red alert. You don't get a situation worse than a tyrannical government wanting to have this level of invasive privacy. Perpetrated on Americans.
It's fascism. It's Soviet fascism. It's Nazi fascism, and now it's American fascism.
And the thing that scares me about it is, I feel like we would be experiencing more outrage with this if it wasn't for the fact that it's Obama in office. Because I know that if this was Bush, it would be probably ramped up or magnified by 3 or 4 times the amount of people protesting this. But somehow there's this level of complacency on the left that those that think, well, it's our guy, we don't have to worry about it. They don't understand that it's an incremental type of situation where, again, the people that wrote the Patriot Act are telling you that they never intended it to be like this, and this is the road we're on, and it's impossible to backtrack. And Obama's comments this past week stood out to me as the policy is ask for forgiveness rather than ask for permission. So this stuff is just going to keep going on and on and on, and it's going to take whistleblowers like Snowden to come out, because there would never be a debate about this. The president is completely lying through his teeth. The members.
I was just going to say the operative word here is lying. He's a liar. He is a complete and utter psychopathic liar. Everything he says is a lie.
And I want to compliment you on that, because I feel like you're one of the few people that's intellectually honest and objective about looking at this situation without being clouded by some sort of a partisan, it's my guy. You know what I mean? At a certain point, you have to realize.
Yeah, I think actually when you talk about partisan, it goes straight back to what you said earlier, and that's an essential point you made. When you have people like MSNBC, which is where, let's say, 90% of people who consider themselves liberal or people who would take offense at this kind of thing, that's where they get their information. He has been ripping up the Constitution and acting like a dictator and violating all of our rights all the time he's been in office. But MSNBC has barely noticed it or said one word about it. And they're where a lot of liberals get their information from. Either that or NPR, which is like having vanilla custard instead of a brain, right? And they're kissing corporate ass all day long. They don't report on this. For instance, here's a perfect example, and I think you've noticed this probably yourself. If you listen to NPR, which I only do once a year in case I maybe fell on my head and didn't know where the knob was to turn it, they'll have an interview or cover a story about what's going on in the United States, and they'll interview some senator or the head of the NSA or whatever it is, or maybe there'll be some press report from the president, and they'll say some outrageous thing, talk about how we have no rights, they can kill whoever they want, whatever it is. In NPR, the commentator will say, "Well, thank you very much, Senator. Have a nice day," right? And then, 1 minute later, but 1 minute later, the BBC comes on with the same story. They'll interview the senator, and instead of saying, "Thank you very much, have a nice day," they'll say, "What? Are you serious?" Right. So we got to listen to the BBC. Yeah, this is what's going on. Liberal?
Journalists are worthless unless they're constantly questioning power.
I'll tell you a great place.
Power corrupts, absolutely.
You're absolutely right, and a wonderful place to go if you want to know what's going on. And I'm recommending somebody who appears on one of our other shows here. There's a guy named Glenn Ford, who is the head of something called the Black Agenda Report. And he makes just the point you just made all the time, that having Obama in is worse than having Bush in one particular way, is that people can turn a blind eye and say, well, he's our guy, he's a liberal, he's a Democrat, he's black or whatever, so it couldn't be that bad, or he probably doesn't really mean that or whatever, right? And he says that's why he's worse. He's more insidious.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's that old, I forgot what movie it was, where the person says, don't you realize if the devil ever appeared to you, he wouldn't have like a pointy tail and horns? He would be the most attractive person you could ever imagine, that would talk with words that are soft as silk, because that's what we have here. Don't you worry, I'm okay. When I get elected, I'm going to go through this line by line, and we'll take care of this. And then, of course, you get into power, and guess what? It becomes seductive, and the next thing you know, it's like, well, wait a minute, we can use this information for our own agenda. And that's the thing that's the scary part about this. Well, people are lulled into this.
That's right. That's right. And in this movie, there's this movie, The Usual Suspects. Did you ever see that movie?
Right. Kaiser Sose.
Right. And the evil guy, who's like the devil, the evil villain in this movie, at one point, somebody says about him, the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing the human race that he doesn't exist.
Right.
Hey, he gets on and talks to Jay Leno. He makes a joke. He has this really nice smile. He says, "Oh, folks shouldn't be concerned." He's a liar and he's a dictator, and people need to wake up. And I don't care, Democrat or Republican. I'm on serious left. What I see is what I see.
Again, our total commitment as a society should, number one, be towards the truth, and number two, towards a hyper form of transparency. Because it's interesting how when you start hearing things about like certain cities where government officials can drive around and their license plates don't come up on the license plate readers so that they can't get speeding tickets and parking tickets, you realize that there's this double type of society that is being formed right now.
Yeah, that's what we have. And I guess one other thing that I was going to throw in with Peter, who was on before, is that you notice at the very moment the NSA's behavior in this country and the government's behavior is coming under question, or should certainly be the major issue all the time on the front pages and on all the TV shows. All of a sudden, they're announcing that the NSA has discovered a tremendous threat. They're going to blow up Yemen and blow up all of our consulates, so they close down the consulates.
We're going to have to raise the code level to hyper pink.
Yeah, hyper pink indeed, right? Don't ask, don't tell. So meanwhile, it's pink and it's yellow. Meanwhile, they're talking about how they intercepted a message. You're supposed to believe a word these people say anymore? Right. You have to be nuts or 6 years old. I mean, government authorities say, really, that they intercepted a message from the new head of Al-Qaeda And he is. This, by the way, is a guy they killed 6 times already in the last 5 years.
And then remember, when you're in office, we've decimated Al Qaeda. They're not
That's right.
anymore, unless, of course, we get into trouble and we've got to ramp things up. Suddenly, now they're a big danger. We're going to close all the embassies.
Now, well, you know what they're going to say next week is, if they get in even more trouble with more stuff that Snowden revealed about their nefarious bullshit, they're going to say that they made a mistake. Osama bin Laden is not dead, and he's going to stand outside your house. He's going to throw cherry bombs at your garage. You know.
I mean, and the thing that stands out to me is I remember
we only got a couple of seconds left. So.
Just always remember this: the FBI informant that talked about the very first World Trade Center bombing was working directly with the FBI. And if it wasn't for the informant making hours worth of recordings, the FBI would have denied any involvement in knowing anything about the first World Trade Center bombing. And they essentially let the thing happen.
Well,
it's absolutely crazy that we're getting involved in so many different levels of this stuff where the government.
We got to go. We got to go. The hour is up. We'll get cut off automatically anyhow. All right. Thanks for calling, Jason. All right, so that's it. We'll be back after the 6 o'clock news to talk about the DEA getting information from the NSA. And this is Mike Fader back again on SiriusXM Progress, SiriusXM Progress 127. Just getting used to our new name here. Used to be Left, now it's Progress. Some of you, as we keep getting more and more revelations about... usually from Mrs. Snowden, but from some other places, I guess, that about what the NSA has been doing and continues to do, and no matter whatever the president is lying about in his last appearance on some show on TV. The latest thing we learned, which is really quite staggering, is that the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, is using the NSA surveillance to prosecute drug offenders. Now, of course, the president... in his attempt to use various lies to cover up everything the NSA is doing, the last-ditch stand for all these people, including people in Congress who love this kind of stuff and who back it to the hilt, people at the NSA, of course, and everybody else who's defending all this and apologizing for it, say, well, we're only using it to fight terrorists, so you should just be quiet and go away because we're protecting you at all. It's only to fight terrorism. Now we discover that the bigger lie was that the DEA is using information from NSA surveillance to prosecute drug offenders, and then the NSA has told the DEA, and DEA has agreed, to lie about where it gets its sources for the arrests, so that nobody even knew about this until we get these revelations from Edward Snowden. We have somebody on tonight to talk about this kind of development and what's been going on with all this, and it's Hani Fakhoury, who has been on with us before. He's a staff attorney at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and he works on issues surrounding the intersection of technology and criminal law, privacy and free speech. This is, in many ways, possibly one of the worst revelations we've seen yet in terms of constitutional law and the rights of Americans, right?
It's definitely very troubling. It really hits a couple different problems. There's the problem with the NSA program in and of itself, but this specific program has some more traditional problems in terms of how the criminal justice system is administered.
So now people should understand what the facts are. It was revealed that the Drug Enforcement Agency has made drug arrests, and this is not a show that supports drug dealers. I'm just saying, this is something that we should all be aware of, right? They've made drug arrests, violations of state or federal law drug arrests. And the information they got was not from their own surveillance, from their own, God knows whatever, their own illegal wiretaps or legal wiretaps, not from informants, not from developing cases or from hard work or anything like that. They got the information from NSA surveillance, and NSA surveillance is supposed to be specifically, according to the laws where it originated from, to fight terrorism or to use surveillance to protect us from terrorists overseas. And now the spying obviously has been used here, but to develop, to pass on information like this and to develop a case and bring somebody to court where evidence is produced that they lie about the evidence, wouldn't that render the trial and the entire conviction, illegal?
Potentially, and that's really, I think, you've hit upon the real problem. The real problem is that in criminal cases, there's a Fifth and Sixth Amendment right for a criminal defendant to be able to not only, obtain evidence that's favorable to that person, but also to challenge and question the credibility and reliability of the government's evidence. And in fact, prosecutors have a ethical obligation to turn over what's called exculpatory evidence, and that generally means evidence that's favorable to the defendant, but it also means evidence that can be used to question the credibility or challenge the reliability of evidence the government wants to put in trial. Mm-hmm. And what this program really does is it insulates that evidence that the government is using to arrest and make cases and drug cases from this whole kind of constitutional framework we've established to ensure that defendants have a fair criminal trial. And so that's really what the big problem is. And like I said, I mean, there's both concerns about the surveillance program in general and these more specific criminal process problems. But what I think is important to note is, look, terrorism cases make up a very small portion of the federal criminal docket, but drug cases make up a significant amount of cases. It makes up 20% of, in 2012, it made up 20% of all federal criminal cases brought, which in isolation, that number doesn't seem that high, but when you actually compare it to all the other federal crimes being charged, it's the second most commonly prosecuted kind of category of crime after immigration crime. So this is happening in a very kind of common bread and butter type of criminal prosecution that you see in federal courts every day.
Does this include arrests for possession or distribution of marijuana?
It potentially could. Despite the fact that a number of states have legalized or at least decriminalized marijuana, we still know that the federal government still goes after marijuana distribution. It still considers possession and distribution of marijuana a crime. We've seen them go after large-scale growing operations. So it very well could be. You very well could have been. We don't know a whole lot. We don't know what specific cases this type of evidence is being used in. But there's. But that's certainly a reasonable assumption to make.
Let's say you had a case in federal court, and it was, a drug arrest, and we have this unit of the DEA called the Special Operations Division. Everything is militarized these days. Special Operations Division, SOD, and here it says that. Remember, this is one of the quotes here from these revelations. Remember that the utilization of SOD cannot be revealed or discussed in any investigative function. A document presented to federal agents reads, it specifically directs agents to omit the SOD's involvement from investigative reports, affidavits, discussions with prosecutors, courtroom testimony. Agents are instructed to then use normal investigative techniques to recreate the information provided. In other words, they're making up where they got all the information from to make the arrest. And if you were in court defending somebody with this revelation now, would you be justified in saying, I would like a special, I'd like to check specially to verify where this information came from, right? People should be more careful about this now if they're defending people in court.
Absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, let me start with a kind of caveat. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court has ruled that in deciding whether police are justified in arresting someone, that they can use pretext. So if they arrest someone because if they decide they want to pull someone over because
traffic
black,
stop.
But then they really pull him over and once he runs a stoplight, all that matters is they had a reason to stop him once he runs over the stoplight. So as a defense attorney, it's not, the revelation of this program isn't going to necessarily help all that much in challenging whether stops are justified. But where it will help is in asking prosecutors to go back and see, what was the actual source of information. Let's say police decide to stop someone because they got a tip by the NSA over a wiretap, for example, that said, hey, there's going to be a big drug deal in this parking lot at 8 o'clock on Saturday night. Mm-hmm. Well, if I'm the defense attorney, I want the prosecutor to go back to the agents, determine whether there was a wiretap let's say, go back, review the wiretap to see if there's any exculpatory evidence that could be obtained by the wiretap. And also, and I think this is a hard sell, but I would still make the argument anyway, that, evidence about how that program works and how that tip was funneled to the DEA is certainly evidence that again, it's because, let me say it this way. You have to, the prosecutors have to turn over evidence that goes to reliability and credibility.
Right.
So to the extent that the program is being used to alert officers, or that a specific person is talking on the phone or over email and NSA intercepts that communication and funnels it, both of those things, their reliability and credibility have to be tested. And it would require the government to go back and do a check to see, is there anything about either of those processes? Like, for example, the person on the wiretap has a rap sheet longer than my right hand, and what that means is that perhaps there's reason to doubt their credibility. Or the program has given false hits before, then that's the type of information that should be turned over.
But you wouldn't even know that. In other words, what DEA apparently is going into court or has gone into court and prosecuted, where they turned information over to the Justice Department, who have prosecuted these cases, and you don't even know where the information came from.
Well, that's the difficulty in it in the abstract. But what I'll note is that there is some discrepancy about that. In fact, a follow-up Reuters story that talked about the IRS having access to some of these tips by the SOD, so it's not just the DEA, but also the IRS for some bizarre reason. But that report by Reuters indicated that the Department of Justice was aware of the program and kept its kind of closely guarded the information that it had. So there's a question as to whether prosecutors are aware of what's going on or not. It may vary in the individual circumstances, but you're absolutely right, though. The problem is by omitting the first step in the chain and not recreating it in the police report or putting it in a search warrant affidavit or whatever it may be, they're effectively making it very hard to kind of retrace the steps.
Wait, let me ask you this question. What about the NSA? Don't they have a certain circumscribed area of operation and basis for what they do? I mean, aren't there any laws whatsoever containing what they do with their information? Isn't it laid out what they're supposed to do?
Well, they're supposed to only be targeting individuals in foreign intelligence and in national security terrorism-related instances. So what that means is they can't necessarily start investigating someone on suspicion that they're a drug dealer. But if in the course of doing an investigation into a terrorism-related threat, they come across other evidence of criminal activity, they are permitted to pass that information on to the other law enforcement agency. So that is not necessarily the most troublesome aspect of the whole program. What's really the biggest problem is omitting that important fact from both defense attorneys and defendants, from perhaps the court during trial testimony to the jury. So kind of skipping that important step, which would otherwise be authorized under the law.
Surely it can't be legal to instruct an agent of the federal government to literally lie about where they got information from. That can't be legal.
I would certainly agree with you on that. I think that that's where there's some real concern about dishonesty and deception on the part of law enforcement in terms of how they're detailing what it is they're doing and how they're getting the information that's leading them to arrest and ultimately leading to prosecutions of people for serious crimes. I mean, there are a number of drug crimes that, drug cases that get processed in state court, but in federal court, it's kind of thought that federal courts take the worst of the worst. They take the bigger cases, they've got the much stiffer penalty. So we're not just talking about misdemeanor type cases. We're talking about people looking at significant prison sentences on account of evidence obtained through a program that was primarily focused on national security and terrorism related cases.
Here's an article that was just in the in the business section of the New York Times today. It says 2 email services close and destroy data rather than reveal files. 2 companies, one is called Lavabit, a Texas-based service that was used by Edward Snowden, And another one, Maryland-based startup called Silent Circle, which actually, I don't know what this means here, but it says the chief executive said the company's customers included heads of state, members of royalty, and government agencies. That's too confusing for me to even digest. But basically, these two companies, which are smaller email services, they closed down and literally destroyed their equipment rather than reveal information or cooperate with the government. What world are we living in here?
Well, we're living in a world where it's becoming harder and harder to escape some of the surveillance apparatus that we've put in place on account of 9/11 and on account of terrorism and national security threats, which, again, kind of like what you said at the beginning of the show, like, I'm not saying that that's necessarily that we shouldn't have some ability to monitor what's happening and keep our borders safe. But the question is, how much of this, what's called sometimes mission creep, are we going to tolerate, where what started as a response to terrorism and a means to stop terrorism and hopefully prevent catastrophic violence occurring before it starts, has now spiraled to where the IRS and the DEA are using this, and domestic law enforcement investigations, and providers of technology that are privacy sensitive have basically given up rather than try to fight the government on getting access to whatever it is they're worried about the government getting their hands on. And that's a sad state of affairs, where in this country, as a small business, you're better off not even existing than to have to fight the national security apparatus, if you will. And so, I mean, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but we have to confront the fact that we've let these programs grow out of control, and not necessarily for bad purposes, but it's time to have a debate and a reexamination of at what point are we going to say, well, enough is enough. We want security, we want privacy, but there has to be a better balance than 100% security and 0% privacy.
I don't think anymore that people have to worry about being a conspiracy theorist when the facts of a conspiracy are pretty clear. So we can toss the theorist out.
Sure.
Here, what's come out recently, the president, being the president, being a politician, he went on Jay Leno. Why not, right? The other night and said that there is no spying on Americans, quote unquote. Obviously there is, though. So now we're into Orwell land, but, where language doesn't mean anything anymore. But apparently there's something, there's like a secret backdoor, a legal loophole, and it's called intelligence data is being gathered under something called Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act. Do you know what that is?
It is a provision of FISA that basically was intended, my understanding is, and I'm not an expert on FISA, but my understanding it was intended to target foreign communications. The FISC, the FISA court, had ruled that certain parts of the government's collection was improper under the Fourth Amendment because there was no minimization procedures, no ways to minimize the types of American data, about people and U.S. citizens in the United States. And so the DOJ, or the response to that, the NSA's response, was to implement some minimization procedures and then essentially say that was adequate to allow them some access into domestic communications, provided they could show a connection to foreign communications. And so there's some worry that becomes a very broad, slippery scope that could potentially lead the NSA into excursions into domestic American citizens' communications.
Well, now they're saying that they keep backing up all the time, which I suppose is not a bad thing, considering they were moving forward without any hindrance at all before. But now they're saying that maybe by accident this happens. In other words, they refer to it, the process where they sweep up this information, Americans, communicating with anybody, anywhere, about anything. They call it incidental collection, which is really some, and somebody actually from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Trevor Tim, he called the president's assurances unbelievable and said they reeked of Orwellian newspeak. And they are acquiring communications basically about targets, maybe legitimate targets, whatever that means, if whatever they tell us we're supposed to believe, that are not to or from the target. In other words, they're this Section 702, and according to Ron Wyden, too, who is saying as much as he can, apparently, without getting prosecuted himself, right? Basically, they threw this net as wide as possible, and now they're inevitably using what they find. So a place like your place, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. By the way, how do people, what's the website for that?
It's EFF.org.
EFF.org. Who supports you? Where do you get your funding from?
We have lots of small little micro donations. We have a growing membership of over 22,000 members who support us, and we get some large donations from very generous individuals, as well as grants. But that's pretty much it.
Uh-huh. And I hope you don't talk about who it is on the phone or send emails about
Absolutely not.
So what is exactly that the Electronic Frontier Foundation does? I mean, what does it do?
We're a civil liberties organization focused on helping to keep our constitutional rights alive in the age of increasing technology and the risks that come with it, including, surveillance like we're talking about now. And so we both do a mixture of litigation and advocacy on these issues. So, for example, we have sued the NSA both in 2006 when details emerged about the warrantless wiretapping program that was initiated under President Bush, and we've given the recent revelations about the NSA collection of telephone metadata that was revealed through these leaks by Mr. Snowden. We have also filed a follow-up class lawsuit as well on behalf of a whole range of associations and organizations whose phone records have been scooped up, challenging whether the warrantless collection of that information is reasonable or unreasonable. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of a mixture, a little bit of what we do. And we also do smaller, cases, as well as a lot of public speaking and media appearances to kind of help people understand and appreciate and demand that their rights be taken seriously.
Are any of the cases that you initiated or that are pursuing, are they actually active in federal court now or higher up the chain?
Well, the case we filed in 2006 is actually still alive 7 years later. There's been a number of attempts by the government to delay the case. One of the big tactics they used was what's called an assertion of the state secrets privilege, which was basically saying that they didn't have to disclose how they engaged in these programs because they're the government and they're allowed to keep certain things secret. And the court had recently denied some of the government claims and allowed some of the claims to go forward. So that one's processing. And then our more recent case concerning the telephone metadata records was recently filed just within the last 6 weeks. So that one is going to be around for a bit. But like I said, what we're doing is we're challenging these programs both through direct litigation as well as our more general advocacy on our blog, on our Twitter account, talking to hopefully getting and engaging with Congress and the executive branch to really re-examine these programs and bring them in line with the requirements of the law.
One last question then. You said engaging and advocacy. It's the executive branch with the collusion of Congress that's basically done this. I mean, it seems to me that the hope is through the federal courts. If you say advocating with the executive branch, what on earth value is that when they're the very people who have been doing this in secret and continue to do it right in people's faces all the time? And who do you approach literally to talk about that?
Well, I mean, I think even just having the general conversation has led to changes. Yesterday, President Obama went on, had a press conference. He indicated 4 changes, 4 reforms that he was going to propose, including a more adversarial process within the FISC itself, being more transparent about what the NSA was doing, releasing some legal justification and opinions that justify the programs. Now, we're not necessarily satisfied.
But that's something he says he's going to do, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, we're not, and we've already seen a little bit of easing up of some of the secrecy around this program in the light of the revelations that Mr. Snowden made. So, I mean, we're not completely satisfied, and we don't think that's enough, but that's it's a step in the right direction, and it's certainly more than we were ever going to learn about before the leaks started coming out. And so, it's that type of process, putting pressure and continuing to speak about it and making sure that the public is aware of what's going on, and it's pretty clear the public is upset about it. That's going to ultimately force the president's hand to do these sorts of things and reveal what's going on, as well as hopefully get Congress to act and the courts to act and understand that, blanket surveillance is unacceptable.
To me, it seems like this is a kind of a tipping point. That phrase is used with global warming all the time. Mm-hmm. To me, it's a kind of a tipping point in terms of what sort of government structure we have anymore in this country, whether it's actually a democracy, a constitutional democracy. Because if this stuff isn't challenged and pushed back at this point and is allowed to go forward, I think we would have passed the tipping point where we have an actual representative democracy.
I think we are.
That's my opinion,
to get there.
Yeah.
I think we're definitely getting to a point where the public outcry has been growing, and that there's still even 2 months after these leaks started to come out, there's still pressure on the president to the point where he has to come out and have a press conference and talk about these things, which I'm sure he had no interest in talking about. So, again, these are steps in the right direction. They're small steps. There's more to be done, but hopefully we're getting that conversation started.
Well, that's good, and I appreciate the work you're doing. So it's the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF.org?
Yes.
Okay, EFF.org, and thank you so much for coming on.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Mike Fader here on Sirius XM Progress 127. Everything is functioning. We're cooking on all burners here. The headphones work. The microphone works. Are you working? You're working, right? Everything is working here. Everybody's working. And so we're going to take a break now, sell you some Viagra, and we'll be back. Man, I didn't get the memo. I really did not get that memo. I got to ask the program director, what is it that we do? Or we're supposed to? I'll do it. I'll sell out. Whatever they want me to do. I mean, they pay me this astounding salary. I'll sell out, but I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. We don't talk, we do here now. But what do we do? I guess I'll just have to talk until I figure out what I'm supposed to do. We got time for calls here. So we've been talking about all these issues tonight. Did you notice it was the extraordinary coincidence, which I mentioned before, that in the midst of all this revelation about the NSA spying on us and the president lying to us all the time, tapping our phones, reading our emails, and that they're doing it no matter what they say. Everything they say is a lie. Now the government says, they tell you. Let me ask you this. You're reading the newspaper, right? Everybody who's listening. You read the newspaper, right? And there's an article, like on the front page of the New York Times. This is my paper, right? I read it because I live in New York City and I grew up with it. So you could be wherever. Maybe you could be reading the Miami Herald, or you could be reading the Post-Dispatch, or anything across the country, whatever your newspaper is, Boston Globe. You pick it up, it says, there's a headline on the front page. It says, government authorities say that huge Al-Qaeda attack imminent. So they closed all the consulates down. And all across the Middle East, all the United States embassies and consulates, except for one or two of them, were closed down. And all the personnel were withdrawn from them because they intercepted the head of Al-Qaeda talking to one of his franchise, it's like McDonald's. They have franchises. One of the franchise, Al-Qaeda in the fifth mountain across from the seventh, parallel in Yemen. Whatever. Al-Qaeda in the Saskatchewan Peninsula. They intercepted. The NSA, get it? The NSA, the very people who we are finding out are spying on all of us and destroying our Constitution and turning the government into a fascist government, right? All of a sudden, they came to the rescue like some guy in an old Western with a white hat and a white horse and saved us from the evil terrorists. They intercepted a communication. They said, very unusual, they say, and it says government authorities. It always says government authorities. Is there anybody listening to me right now when they see those two words, government authorities, that doesn't actually sneer or laugh out loud? Who is left that believes any government authority, especially at the higher levels? If government authorities say, or sources in the federal government say, do you believe a word of it anymore? I don't. You'd have to be stupid to believe a word they say, because they lie to you every minute they open their mouths. How do you know? This is someplace I read this somewhere. How do you know when the president is lying? If you see his mouth moving. And so they intercept this message from this guy. Now, the other thing you read in the paper all the time is that they're always telling you how their drones are so effective, how the CIA is effective, how the NSA is effective, how our government forces, everything is so effective in government. They tell you over and over and over again for years now that they have practically destroyed all of Al-Qaeda. They've destroyed everything. They've destroyed the whole infrastructure. They've destroyed leaders of Al-Qaeda. So one guy, I could swear to God that this guy, they already said they killed him, but he rose from the dead like a zombie or something from a bad B horror movie. And now they caught his phone call. They said it was very unusual for him to say directly to one of his subordinates in Yemen that they should attack all the U.S. embassies all over the Middle East. Yeah, it's unusual. I'm sure it's unusual. You think they don't know that everybody's listening to every single word and watching every movement with a camera that they do? I don't know how they operate, whatever. Are there real terrorists out there? Clearly, there are real terrorists in the world. Dangerous, crazy people. And I suppose they have to be dealt with. But to use this as an excuse, so they close all the consulates. First of all, what kind of message does that send? If we have destroyed Al-Qaeda, if we've been at war for 12 years now, and we have kicked everybody's ass, and hundreds of thousands of evil Taliban and Al-Qaeda people are dead, wounded, or buried, or in black prisons somewhere, if we destroyed them all, if we had a big success here in combating terrorism, why is it that we run like little chickens, right? Little tiny bunnies, every time somebody gets on the phone and says, let's blow something up, but don't tell everybody because they might be listening. Are we that scared of the people that we actually killed already or reduced to the size of nothing? Make up your minds. Either all this trillions of dollars, all this effort, all this spying, all this murder, all this blowing people up actually works or it didn't work. Right? Why are we so scared with all of these weapons and all this spy and surveillance equipment, with all these jackbooted, invading special ops people we send all over the world? Why do we run like terrified little rabbits when they intercept a phone call from somebody to somebody else? Why is that? Furthermore, what message does it send to these people if they really are out there? What message does it send if just by a simple phone call to say that they want to do something and that they intend to do something, that we close everything down? I'm not in favor of this, but if we're going to, act so belligerent and be so tough and be all over the world and our presence is everywhere and scare the shit out of people, then why are we acting like we're so scared? Why are we closing everything down? It's all crap. It's all lies. It's a ridiculous, stupid coincidence that they came up with an NSA scoop that's theoretically saved so many lives at the very moment when the NSA is rightly being portrayed as nothing but a Nazi organization. It's nothing but a coincidence. And here's another question, too. I guess this is the last question. And we have room for some calls now. Anybody want to call on this? We've been talking about this all night. These are essential issues. To me, there are three things, and there's all kinds of stuff that we could be concerned about. I mean, the treatment of women, treatment of gays, wars, corruption in politics. There's three issues that concern me above all others. And they always have and they always will, because to me, they're at the root of everything. One is the destruction of our planet. We won't have anything left to even talk about if the planet, heats up to the point where we're all drowned or fried alive. The second thing is income inequality. The fact that there's maybe several 100,000 people in the world that have as much as 5 billion of the rest of us, that's outrageous and has to be changed if we have to even take it from them by force. Right? And the other thing, that billions of people starve or live in utter misery or don't have access to the simplest ways of living a decent life, while there are people who have hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, 10, 11, 12 mansions all over the world, have billions of dollars where people have no money at all and are living in trailers and are living on food stamps, is outrageous and should not be tolerated. And I would almost encourage any kind of behavior to make that balance more equal. And the other thing that bothers me as much as anything ever did and still does is any kind of restriction on free speech, because without free speech, you could never have any kind of equality or democracy. There will be you'll be never be able to say it or hear it, then you won't know it's happening and you won't be able to do anything about it. And that goes with free assembly. So the government lies to you all the time. What can you do about it? I don't know. I guess you stay tuned to programs like this. You're not going to hear it on MSNBC. You're not going to hear it on an NPR. You'll hear it on some community radio stations. You'll hear it on some of the Pacifica stations. And you hear it here on Sirius Left. Maybe not even on every show. But this is what's going on. So anybody wants to call about these issues, I'm going to move on to something else after the 7 o'clock news. But now's your time to call. About any kind of political issue you want to call about. 866-997-4748. Give us a call and join in. This is your radio station. You subscribe. You pay for it. I actually even get a little bit of the money that you pay into it. And I'm here to tell you give us a call. If you're out there, call us. What do we have? Chuck from Indiana, you're on.
Hello, Mike. First time listener, actually, to be perfectly honest with you. And I got to tell you, I couldn't more strongly disagree with you on a lot of different things. You're saying we run around like chickens in fear of an attack. Well, having been in the intelligence community in a previous life, we have to take these threats seriously, because it's people on the left who's going to raise the biggest bunch of crap the next time there's another 9/11 style attack. So if we aren't taking steps to protect ourselves and put these warnings out, then you're going to, and there happens to be a George W. Bush in office, you're going to tell us all how we're a bunch of idiots because of the guy in the White House. It's common sense. You have to plan for the worst, because there are people out there trying to hurt us.
What did you do? What was your job?
I'll just say I was.
Wait. Don't tell me I'll just say. Don't act like some cloak and dagger James Bond. Tell me what you did for a living before.
I can't.
Oh, you can't? Well, let's move on to another call. I don't want to hear any more of that bullshit. You can't tell me? It's a secret, right? Everything's a secret. Fuck you and your secrets. Who do we have? Bob from Oklahoma. Bob, you there? Yeah.
I sure am. How you doing?
Okay.
Hey, this is the first time I've ever listened to you, to be honest with you. And I'm pretty much conservative as heck, and I'm finding out that I kind of like what you're saying on most subjects. It surprises me.
Well, you know what? It shouldn't. At this point, it's not a question of left and right anymore. It's a question of being an American, having basic rights, and having the government, no matter who it is, Republicans or Democrats, infringe on our basic rights. That affects everybody across the spectrum, I think, don't you?
Absolutely. And it's getting to be more and more intrusive all the time. I see it every day. I'm a truck driver, and the government's bearing down on us with more rules and regulations seems like every day. And that's just one segment of the population. They're doing it to everyone.
Hmm. So when you talk to people, do they have this? Are you sensing a kind of general attitude about finally getting, sick to death of people being, of the government spying on us?
Up to a point, there's several people I work with that are complacent about it. They just say, well, it's got to be done. It's going to save us. But most of the people that I deal with every day, they're just about fed up with it, and they're getting to a breaking point, to be honest with you.
Well, that's something that I think we should be glad to hear, that people are finally waking up from a trance that they've been in. I mean, after all, I was just talking earlier, maybe you heard me, maybe not. We were talking about the fact with a guest who's a lawyer, about the fact that the Drug Enforcement Agency has now started to arrest drug dealers using information gotten by the NSA in its phone taps of Americans and its, whatever else it's doing, reading your emails. They're using that information. That means that probably the FBI, maybe the state police, and maybe local police are making every kind of arrest for anything, and that it can include stuff that goes on, when you're hauling a load somewhere, for all I know, based on information that the government gets from spying on all of us. Where does it all stop?
Well, I know locally they were giving away all these phones to low-income people, and they were actually listening to all their conversations locally and made several drug busts that way.
Well, see, that's what happens.
The county.
Apparently, that's what happened. My guest was on here before, who was a State Department employee for like 20-something years and knows about all this kind of stuff. He said that what they were doing in Afghanistan, they're doing in this country now. What they do is they they've planted stuff in phones that they sell to people, or if you download stuff onto your smartphone, so it's for the smartphone, right, that implanted in this stuff, it could be anything. It could be a game you're downloading, it could be pornography, it could be anything at all that you're downloading. The NSA, apparently, along with the FBI, has now implanted software inside of these things that you download, which spy on your calls when you download the information into your cell phone. They've even developed something that they use in Afghanistan, where even if you change I think it's called a SIM card in a cell phone, the cell phone still retains in some version of its hard drive information that has spyware that the government uses. This is not stuff I'm making up. They're actually doing this now. And I think people on the left and right should probably stop fighting with each other and turn their faces towards the real enemy, which is our own government, which is treating us like we're all terrorists and we're all spies.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. Like I say, it shocks me that I agree with you on 90% of what you've been talking about today.
Well, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that we could find something to agree on, because I think it's in the government's interests to have all of us, right, left, fight with each other all the time. It makes it easier for them to do whatever they want.
Yeah, it makes it easier to control. People are all with one mindset.
Yeah, well, I think it's good that people are getting together on these issues, because this is what makes us Americans, right? These are basic freedoms that are being trampled on. You know, we've got to move on, take some other calls.
Thank you.
Thanks for calling. Who do we have? Lee from Detroit, you're on.
Hey, Mike, I want to talk about this corporate welfare that's being handed out here in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
The state is supposed to be broke. We're paying for three governments. Number one, we have an elected government, that we have a city council and a mayor. Then we have this financial review board appointed by the governor. And now we have an emergency manager that's spending money like it's water, and this is from a state that elected a governor is supposed to be fiscally conservative. These Republicans that are running the state that decided that 50% of Michigan blacks don't deserve elected government, that they have to appoint people to run us. And so, they filed for bankruptcy, saying that Detroit's broke and we can't afford police, fire, and city services that we're paying taxes for. And then the very next day they say, oh, now we're going to pay for a billionaire's new hockey stadium. We're going to pass a bond so that a billionaire can have a brand new hockey stadium. But you guys that live there that are paying the taxes, no, you can't have police and fire and garbage pickup or any kind of city service that you're paying taxes for.
Yeah, I can guarantee you that the state-appointed financial manager is not staying at the Best Western and eating at McDonald's.
No, he's staying at the penthouse of the Book Cadillac and charging us $2,000 a day for food.
Yeah, in a city that's broke. I mean, what world is that?
And the thing is, he's not even paying out of his salary. He's charging it to the city that's broke.
Well, what is the conclusion that you draw from this?
That the city's not broke, number one, because we're paying for three governments. That they have this is corporate welfare. This is fascism. Because what triggered me was the word you used, fascism. And people like to think of Hitler when they think of fascism. But when I was in school, I was taught that fascism was the merger of government and business interests, corporate interests. Mm-hmm. And that is exactly what is happening here in Detroit. This is government for the benefit of corporations.
Well, the one, we talked to somebody last week who is the head of the Detroit Metro AFL-CIO, and the fact of the pension responsibilities is a real fact. In other words, people ignored this for a long time. There just was never enough money. They ran a deficit. They kept paying, borrowing money to pay for pensions that they had to lay out, right? The truth is that all over the country, it's not that just Detroit now, there's almost like a domino thing going on. People are looking at Chicago now as the next city that may have to go through this, right? And in most of these cases, it happens to be city employee pensions that add up and benefits for medical benefits that add up for retirees who work for the city. That is, EMS people, cops, firemen, nurses, teachers. It's tens of billions of dollars which are unfunded. But that doesn't mean that that what you're saying isn't true. In other words, just because we don't have the money for them doesn't mean we cut their services or their pension or their retirement funds, which, by the way, are hardly enough to live on anyhow, or cut their medical benefits after all their years, decades of service to various cities. No, the place we need to look for is the corporations who are not paying their taxes, corporations who influence state governments to give them breaks, places that are not enforcing minimum wage laws. In other words, it's the corporations and the people who have all the money that we need to take it from them, and we could easily fund these pension requirements.
Well, Mike, it's even worse than that. we got $4 billion in the city's pension fund, and they're actually making a profit, unlike the state's pension fund, which is not making a profit. The city retiree workers make $19,000 a year in pension money. That's their pension. It's not some extravagant pension. They're paying Kevin Orr and these 9 other financial managers $220,000 apiece to do the job of the city council and the mayor. Astounding.
Absolutely astounding. As if they couldn't find a bookkeeper to do it for $12 an hour.
Or a student coming out of finance school to do it. And the thing is, Mike, they're not collecting Detroit city taxes. The state doesn't collect taxes from the people who work in Detroit, right? They don't collect those taxes, so those taxes aren't getting paid back to the city, and then they withhold revenue sharing. So they put a cap on what Detroit can charge in taxes, and they say, we'll make that up by revenue sharing, and they take away the revenue sharing. So the state of Michigan owes the city of Detroit over $770 million, right? So they're not paying their bill. This is they intentionally run Detroit into financial distress and then say that we have to take it over because Detroit is financially in distress.
It's all privatization. It is all privatization. It's all RoboCop all over the place. You know what I mean? Everything is Omnicorp. They're privatizing the federal government. The federal government is privatizing the post office on purpose to make money for corporations. Happening everywhere. So what do we do about it?
Well, number one, we have to educate people to what is really going on. Because if you listen to corporate media, you're not getting the story. The only thing they want to focus on is the pension fund and how lavish the retiree benefits are.
Yeah, lavish, right, lavish. If you get $20,000, which is practically nothing, you still have to pay taxes, and you're supposed to pay your bills on that?
And the governor last year raised the taxes on the pensions retiree fund and then lowered the taxes by that same amount on corporations that moved to Michigan.
Well, you know what, we got to move on and take another call, but here's what I think about that. I think that if people don't wake up and take their government back and their land and their cities and their states back from these people, then they have only themselves to blame. I mean, I could literally rise up and take it back. And I'm not necessarily talking about voting. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to move on to another call.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, thanks. Who do we have? Mike, you're on, Mike.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on the first guy you had interviewed. He said something originally about the grapes of wrath, and he was referring to how the middle class at one time had a stake in what was going on in this country. And he also pointed out historically how when you look at the past, you have somewhat of an idea of what's happening in the future.
Oh, yeah.
And my sort of take on that is something people don't really discuss very much, but in terms of ideology, what you saw at that time, I think, was a struggle between two ideological or economic systems that were completely incompatible with one another. And for that reason, you had what was defined as the Cold War. And what we saw at that time, I think, was to some extent a capitulation, a limited capitulation from capitalism and the right to sort of give in to social concerns, because you had on the left an opposing ideology that actually had somewhat traction and an attractiveness to people in this country. But now I think what happened is, in turn, and it's a coincidence how this sort of happens with Reagan and the collapse of communism, is the left sort of loses its basis for an ideological argument altogether. And I think it's coincidental that this champion for the right just shows up at that time. It's not a conspiracy. I just find it an amazing coincidence. But that is one of the reasons I attribute the right shift, that we've had this earthquake in ideology that's moving this country continuously more and more to the right. And what we're seeing as a loss of middle-class values is because ideologically there's no basis anymore for an argument or a strategic opposition. There's no foundation for what we call the left anymore. So the country just keeps shifting to the right. And when you talk about money, which is what's driving the whole system on the right, money is pretty much dominating the world now. It is essentially something that is on the move. It's everywhere in our world. It's everybody, even people that were once considered to be sort of left sympathetic. We all essentially, implicitly owe our lives to the economic system that we now find ourselves caught in between.
Nothing stays the same forever. Nothing, not in nature, not in physics, not in politics. Nothing stays the same forever. The whole world, the whole country is drifting way over towards the right. I mean, it almost looks as if we're going to have slavery with a bunch of slave masters. We're going so far to the right.
Well,
it is already.
It's a new master and a new slave. Nothing's changed. If you go all the way back to the beginnings of Christianity, you find the Roman Empire, and what it stood for was a monetization, initially a political economy that was moving where we're founded on is that same idea. And Christianity was rising out of that as an opposition, a counter, sort of like.
Well, there will always be part of it. In other words, there is a dialectic. Things will always react. In other words, we are headed, I think, right now to a massive reaction to this right wing serf-like behavior of governments and corporations.
Before that happens, people have to realize there's an implicit acceptance and agreement that our lives are genuine, are a part of the system. It's like I'm going to go to something.
No, you can't because we're up. The hour is up. We only have like 30 seconds.
One last thing.
Real quick.
That line, you remember that line in the Matrix? They are so dependent on the system that they will fight and defend it to the end. You see, our lives, if our political economy collapses, your life, my life, nobody's life is possible because we live beyond the system of nature now.
Yeah, all right. What we have to do is we have to set up a new system. That's what our job is. All right, thanks for calling. We're going to move on. Listen, we have to move on. Thank you. Goodbye. Why is it that I can't sometimes make myself understood? I don't understand that. So, all right. We're headed towards the end of the hour here. Come back after 7 o'clock, and everybody who comes back will get a free donut. Because we don't just talk here, we do. All right, here we are, the big broadcast of 1939. This is Mike Feder coming to you from the Starlight Ballroom. Here at the top of, wherever it is we're at the top of. Was it the McGraw-Hill building? I forget the name of this building. Some giant skyscraper in New York. But we don't just talk here. We don't just talk. No. We do. And we know what we're doing. And when we say we're doing things, we do those things. We're not just talking, we're doing. That's right. This is serious progress. We're making progress here. We don't hold things back. We push things forward. This is progress here. We don't just talk. We do.
When I was a kid, about 3:30, my mom said, "Daughter, come here to me." Says things may come and things may go, but this is one thing you ought to know. Oh, take what you do with the way that you do it. Take what you do with the way that you do it. Take what you do with the way that you do it. That's what gets results. Take what you do.
Absolutely. That's what gets results. Is that the coolest thing in the world? They don't make songs like that anymore. All right. Here we are. This is, here we are, the year of our Lord, or your Lord, or their Lord, 2013. 50 years, by the way. We're almost 2 weeks away, roughly 2 weeks away, August 28th or 29th, I forget what it is, from one of the most famous speeches ever made in the United States of America. Maybe you could think of 2 or 3 speeches, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, maybe 1 or 2 other speeches. There's some that aren't so famous, but should be. But one of the most famous speeches ever made in this country. And I say famous, not just because it was famous. You know, like everything these days is somebody's famous just for being famous. Now, this was something so substantial and so profound and so history changing. And the man himself who made this speech was so history changing that it is one of the turning points of American history. And I am talking about Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. And it will be on August, I forget, is it 28th or 29th, the 50th anniversary of this astounding speech that this man made. It's about 11 minutes long. And the Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, by the way, was something like about 3 minutes or 2 minutes long. It's only like four or five paragraphs at the most. I forget. But Martin Luther King's speech was 11 minutes long. And this is, we're going to talk more about this. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to build up to this. And we are going to play the entirety of the speech on here because it is one of the most inspiring things that any American has ever said. And it was captured because of modern technology, obviously. 1963 at the Washington Monument, at the whatever it's called. So what is it called? I don't know. The memorial, something like the mall. Anyhow, several 100,000 people, 1963, in the summer of 1963, from all over the country, black and white, you know, whatever, you know, upper class, middle class, lower class, everybody got together there in a nonviolent way. After all, Martin Luther King was an espouser of Jesus and Gandhi's method of political activity, which was nonviolence. He was a Christian. He didn't believe in hurting other people, you know, but he was aggressive and he broke laws that needed to be broken. Down south, where he was put in jail, where he was marching for the rights of people to just survive, not to just vote, but just to actually live without being beaten up and tortured and lynched. So this man who had paid so many dues, this man who was the champion, he was the living champion of all that was decent and right in America at the time, made this astounding speech. And if you never heard it, we're going to play it on August 24th here on this program. And you should make sure to listen to it. I'm sure you can, if you want to, you can go listen to it anytime you want. It's on YouTube. But we're going to play it, and we're going to have some guests on, and we're going to talk about it because we're going to celebrate this on August 24th. The 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, which actually summed up the feelings of a gigantic cultural and political movement and racial movement in this country and started turning things around. And finally, it was about no more than 2 years later when we had all kinds of changes in laws. We had a Democratic administration, a Democratic Congress, and a Democratic president. And even though he probably didn't want to do it, Mr. Johnson, coming from Texas as he did, and other people in Congress didn't want to do it, it was an example of the people of the United States, because the United States right now, if we think of the United States, we think of, what's the first thing if I say the United States, what do you think of? You think of, what's the images that pop into your head? You think of Washington. You think of the president. You think of the army. You think of the government. You think of flags. You think of uniforms. No. The United States of America is meant to be and is actually and should be, again, more strongly, the people of the United States of America. It's the United States of America. It is the United People of America. And Martin Luther King was the man of the hour. He came together and spoke for all the people in the country, and it didn't hurt that he had possibly, as far as I know, and I've listened to a lot of people speak, the most moving, passionate, resonant, inspiring voice of anybody I have ever heard speak anywhere. Now, I have heard 1 million politicians speak in my time, and actors, famous actors, but I have never heard anybody speak the way this man did. First of all, he had a gift from God, which was the tone of his voice. He had a deep, moving, human voice. He was trained as a preacher, so he knew how to do that. He had that special sort of sermonizing rhythm, and he came from the black culture in the South where there was music in the voice. You don't just stand there and say, turn to chapter 23, verse 6, and the Alcalesians went out of Jerusalem and blah, 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 blah. No. He included heart, mind, culture, music, everything into his voice and summed everything up. And he made a speech, was the most rousing speech, and possibly in the history of the United States, along with the Gettysburg Address. And so we're going to celebrate that. So we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of that. And we're going to have guests on in the next couple of weeks that are going to talk about the civil rights movement in the 60s, the roots of it, where it came from. We have a guy who's the official historian, actually, of the Saturday Evening Post, which goes all the way back to the 1840s. And a lot of the Post articles that were written in the 1950s, 40s, and 60s. In fact, there's a bunch of articles that were written in the 40s he's going to start talking about the way blacks were treated during World War II in terms of racism and being able to get there were these hundreds of thousands, millions of jobs in the defense industry, almost none of which blacks were allowed to have, right? So the whole country was being employed again after the Depression, and blacks applied for these jobs, people who were qualified mechanics, people who could do all kinds of work, but they were turned away. And this is North and South, right? And the president and people went to Roosevelt, Whitney, the head of the various unions and the NAACP. They went to Roosevelt and they said, "You've got to change this. We've got millions of people who are starving, and why are they not included in this?" Renaissance of jobs and money. Why are they being discriminated against? In fact, Walter White, who was the head of the AACP at the time, and A. Philip Randolph, head of the sleeping car porters union, which is his massive union at the time, he said, "We're going to shut this country down. We're going to shut down the trains. We're going to shut everything down. If you don't extend availability of jobs to black people, and B, if you don't open up the armed forces and the armed services to black people who, strangely enough, want to defend the country that has treated them the way that's treated them, and yet they want to show that they're patriotic Americans," they were being turned away too. So we're gonna talk about all this stuff in the next couple of weeks, and various other issues too. I have something I was going to talk about, a couple of other issues I'm going to talk about tonight, but if you want to call up, I'm very happy to take your calls. Once again, I wanted to mention that there are all kinds of important political issues, and let's say if you're a woman, if you're gay, if you're black, these issues, depends on who you are and what position you are in society, white, black, Muslim, Latino, it's religion, it's gender, it's sex, it's whatever it is. It could be the most important thing. To me, the things that subsume all of this, that lie at the bottom, at the foundation of all of these things, are a certain kind of eternal balance of power. And the balance of power is way out of balance now. So to me, the most important things are income inequality in this country. The fact that so few people have so much and so many people have so little. It's completely unacceptable. This is not the way we were meant to live, I believe. I don't believe it's a Darwinian jungle out there. I think the arc, as Martin Luther King said, that the arc of human history tends towards, and I'm paraphrasing wildly here, tends towards the moral, right? In other words, things generally get better. We don't have actual mass slavery anymore. Women are not treated, at least in many countries, but it's still in some, as second-class citizens anymore, although there's still a lot of catching up to do. And you see the Republicans want to turn the clock back on all these things. Things are generally better, even though it looks awful in the world, than they used to be. But we have to keep fighting. I mean, not to quote Barry Goldwater, but I'll quote Barry Goldwater. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. You just have to keep these people honest. You have to keep people honest. So I believe in that income inequality is the main thing to address, as the Occupy movement tried to do before they were beaten into pieces by the militarized cops and by the disdain and ridicule of the corporate media. They should burn in hell for what they did. And I'm sorry, I don't want to be too passionate about it. Am I going too far? Let's just a touch. And also, I believe in free speech as the most important thing of all. If you can't say it, then nobody's going to hear it. If you can't assemble peaceably as an American citizen with other people who agree with you to express your outrage at what a government's doing or a corporation, then nothing will ever change. If I don't have the right to say what I'm saying, and thank God I still do, who knows how long, then people will never know what's going on. You don't know what's going on if you read most newspapers, if you listen to MSNBC, if you watch any other television station, if you listen to NPR, you're not going to really know what's going on in the world. Forget about it. It's not going to happen. These are corporate entities, and you're not going to know. Only by listening to a place like this, or maybe some community radio stations, or some of the more left-wing, non-commercial stations in the country. And there's precious few of them. All right, who do we have? Anthony. So where is everybody? Is everybody on vacation? Did your phones die? I want some calls here. 866-997-4748. However, do not call me up and say, I heard you say you wanted me to call, but what are we talking about? Don't do that. Okay, Anthony, go ahead.
Hey, Mike. First of all, as somebody who's been a part of the Occupy movement since the beginning, it's nice to hear someone talk about what the militarized police did to us when we dared question income equality. But I want to tie this into your earlier comments about the NSA, because my belief is that, this isn't about terrorism. This is about the end of capitalism. And they know what's happening. They know that the system is rotten and that it needs to be replaced. And their fear is that the people will figure it out. And we did, and many of us have.
Well, wait. Let me just define some terms here. They know it's rotten, but they don't care, of course. When you say they know, we all know what you're talking about when you say they, okay. But when you say they know it needs to be replaced, they don't think it needs to be replaced. We think it needs to be replaced.
True.
Okay.
But there's a fear, though, that I have that are concerned that potentially some people in power in the corporatocracy that runs things does understand that things won't be able to continue the way they're going to continue, and so that's where we start moving toward feudalism, and I think it's already happened. Mm-hmm. You got people. Remember in the mines years ago, people used to sell their soul to the company store.
Right.
They worked for the mine, and they got paid in. If you get to bring a gallon of milk home, that's how you got paid. So you were indebted all the time because the mine owned the store where you had to buy your goods.
And the house that you lived in.
Oh, and the house you lived in. I forgot about that.
Right.
That's your big box retail stores. That's what's going on. Lower and lower wages, your fast food things, making people dependent on a system. This is not, consumer-based capitalism that we had in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. Not that there weren't things wrong with it. We had racism. We had a whole bunch of things wrong. But, you know what I'm saying? So I think
this is peonage, it's serfdom, and it's compulsory capitalism.
And I'll tell you, I think that to me, and you always look at things through the lens that you look at life through. But my experience in the Occupy movement has been wonderful because I've met some incredible people, and disheartening because of the response of the powers that be, of the police, of the mayor of New York, of the president of the United States, of the media, on and on and on. And look, man, people are getting questioned by the FBI right now. We're nonviolent. It's beyond me.
The last count I read about 2 or 3 months ago is, to date, starting from the beginning of the Occupy movement, close to 8,000 people were arrested in various parts of the country. Some with some just tickets, and other people actually serving jail sentences. And to date, not one banker has been arrested.
Not one banker has been arrested.
But 8,000 occupiers.
Yeah, 8,000 occupiers. Let me tell you, and the stuff that we've seen. People standing in public space, engaging in conversation. I mean, I would be in Zuccotti Park. Wall Street brokers would walk by. We'd actually have conversations. They fear that. And the police, I remember one time just seeing a group of about 6 police across the street, and they were clutching their clubs. Mm-hmm. They're not batons, they're clubs. And they just said, let's go. And they just walked across the street, and they started pushing people and hitting people. I've seen it so many times.
And there's a reason they can get away with that, is because the press and the broadcast media on TV, especially because it shows images, they either ignored it or ridiculed this movement. Why? Because they make hundreds of thousands and tens of millions of dollars selling corporate crap, even on MSNBC. They are not going to be even allowed. The only one who said one word about it was Keith Olbermann on Current TV. Unfortunately, he's an egocentric lunatic who needed millions of dollars and he quit. But he was the only one paying any attention to it. The cops can get away with beating people up just when they're expressing their basic rights as Americans if the media turns a blind eye to them. For instance, in 1968 in Chicago at the convention, one of the reasons why it was so impressive and influential when you saw the cops rioting and the whole country saw what pigs literally they were, was because the media was allowed to focus their cameras on them. And when they hit somebody on the convention floor, when they beat people up who were in the press reported on it and objected to it. Now the press has rolled over completely and is just, basically handed a tube of Vaseline and said to bend over. You want $3 million, Wolf? Bend over,
Let me tell you quickly, I take the opportunity to mention this. November 15th, 2011, the night that the NYPD violently raided and broke up the encampment at Zuccotti Park in New York City, which we call Liberty Square. That night, I live on Long Island, so I went in. We saw the tweets that this was happening. The city of New York surrounded the park with fire trucks and sanitation trucks, so news cameras could not see in while it was happening. And I talked to a reporter for WCBS, and he said that they were told that their news copter could not fly overhead.
That's right. I remember that. I remember that.
This is insane.
Well, this is, and on top of that, the police literally roughed up. They grabbed people and threw them against the wall who were reporters for the New York Times and CBS and a couple of other places, and they didn't say a thing about it. Once that happens, forget democracy, pal. Listen, I'm getting a signal. I should take some other calls, but thanks for calling. All right. Got it. Okay, who do we have? Antonio in Milwaukee. You were on the radio.
Mike, how's it going?
All right.
I love the show, man. I love your enthusiasm.
Thank you.
But yeah, I called because I want to talk about. I guess I don't know the recent news about Goldman Sachs being, allocated for criminal charges now.
Oh, that's JP. Actually, JP Morgan is.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So it's a little interesting because, it's kind of frustrating. You were just talking to the last gentleman about, nobody's been prosecuted yet for the criminal act that they did in the banking crisis. And it's just like, why do we have a judicial system if it only works for common people?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I mean, basically, these bankers destroyed the whole world's economy, not just the United States, but the whole world's economy. People in Greece and Spain and other countries all over the world, Ireland, in England, and in this place and many other countries are starving to death, literally, and have no pensions and have no futures anymore. People are actually killing themselves. Things are so bad. The bankers are the ones who did it. The bankers with their toy politicians are the ones who did it. And this is the first time in something like, I don't know what it is now, 5 years, that they are taking two of these bankers who worked in London for JP Morgan and were gambling the way they were with other people's money and lost $6 billion. They're actually prosecuted.
Right, and the same thing with, LIBOR, HSBC. HSBC found that they were harboring terrorist money. And it's like nothing happened?
They laundered international Colombian cartel drug money to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. They laundered terrorist money, and not one of them got so much as a parking ticket. What world is this? What world is this?
It's insane. It's mind-boggling. I don't understand. If you go after Eric Snowden, just for releasing information about the hidden stuff that the government has been doing, in the outside government forces and these corporations, and then with HSBC is this huge corporate bank, and it's been doing worse, and they get nothing.
Not only that, the head of the United Bank of Switzerland, which was another one of these banks that did the whole world in, and it was laundering money and protecting the wealthy, who were having offshore accounts. The head of this company, who quit actually about a year ago, before Obama started seriously campaigning and running again for a second term, his best friend His best friend, Obama, a guy he plays golf with all the time, plays basketball with again, hangs out with. His best friend was a guy named Robert Wolf, the head of UBS, right? That's his pal. That's who our president pals around with. But you have a choice. He's the lesser of two evils. That's the lesser of two evils.
And I know I hate that term though. Just the lesser of two evils. And this is my fight. You know, I really like Elizabeth Warren. I wish that she would run more.
Oh yeah.
For 2016 instead of Hillary Clinton, because she's a moderate conservative to me. And so, you know, people ask me, it's like, well, she's a liberal, but no, she's not. She's really not. I was like, you've seen her stance on certain things that she's voted for.
Right.
And so it's like, you know, somebody like myself, this is my plan. In the next couple of years, I'm moving to Chicago, and I want to get deeply in sync with politics so I can root some of these guys out. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I'm going to try to run for the Senate. I'm going to try to run for the Senate and then look and put up a stand against, you know, corporate greed, anything. Certain corporations are fine. You know, you have those that are doing what they need to do. But when bankers continue to get over on people, the poor keeps getting poorer, and nobody's actually standing up for it. And you have these quote-unquote titles of Republicans and Democrats when they're all in the same together. It's only a certain, there's a few that aren't in the same boat in the bed with these corporations.
No, but 99% of them, you might as well call them Republicrats because it's all the same thing. I have to move on. Take some more calls.
Thanks, man.
All right. Thanks for calling. Thank you. Who do we have? Bobby in Oregon. You're famous. You're on the radio.
Hey, Mike. Love your show. I just started listening a few weeks ago. I got a satellite radio here in my truck. Truck driver, right. And enjoy your show. Hey, I want to talk to you. Have more Americans been killed by terrorists or by corporations, big business?
Well, that's a rhetorical question. The answer is obvious.
Yeah, right. I had heard a famous quote by Bobby Kennedy Jr. the other day where he was talking about how the coal companies are blowing up the tops of these mountains to get the coal veins and tons of nitroglyceride or washing down, poisoning thousands of rivers, miles of rivers and streams, giving people cancer. And Bobby Jr. said, you know, if terror came over and poisoned our rivers and streams and gave our people cancer, you know, America and media would be up in arms. But, you know, big businesses are doing it. No one says anything.
Yeah.
Probably hundreds of examples.
If they're going to be using drones on terrorists, what they need to do is fly over the company headquarters of, Massey Energy and all these other coal companies who are blowing up the entire state of West Virginia and parts of Pennsylvania and literally poisoning and giving cancer to tens of thousands of people, a lot of them children. They should take drones and use them against the real terrorists in this country. The real terrorists in this country are the heads of corporations who poison our country, fracking, coal mining, GMOs and everything else. They are the terrorists. They terrify me. They terrify everybody. If we've got the NSA and we've got drones and we've got the CIA, I know just who to send them after.
I love it. Hey, love your work. Love your show. Thanks, man.
Thanks for calling.
Okay.
We should, we got some people on the line? All right. You know what we should do is, everybody who's on the line, if you're listening to me, hang on. We have to, go to some commercials and, we will be back because we don't just talk here. We do.
When I was a kid about 3:30, my mom said, daughter, come here to me. Says things may come and things may go, but this is one thing you ought to know. Oh, take what you do it the way that you do it. Take what you do it the way that you do it. Take what you do it the way that you do it. That's what gets
That's right. That's what gets results. That's right. What do we have? What do we have? Ed in Texas, you're on the radio.
Hi, Mike.
Hey.
I like your show. I'm really getting fed up with this income inequality. And, these people that got all this money, and then you got people like who just can't get by, like on minimum wage and all that.
Mm-hmm. I know it's bad.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I just sort of barely. What do you do down there? Are you retired or what?
I can't hear you. You're breaking up on me.
Oh, it must be. Are you traveling? Are you in a car or a truck?
I'm using my cell phone.
Yeah, no, the signal is bad. I don't know. We can hear you though.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm a truck driver, and I agree with you like 99% of the time. So, I think that this country is, hopefully, things will get better. People will rise up.
I hope so. I really hope so. Thanks for calling. Who do we have? Eric in Reno. You're in Reno, Nevada?
Well, I'm still leaving Reno. I'm another trucker calling.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
But, yeah. So what are you doing? Are you supposed to be doing something?
That's what it says on. That's what the announcer guy says. We don't just talk, we do. But well, hold on a second. Let me check. No, I'm looking through all my memos. It doesn't tell me what to do. So you better say something.
I'm glad you're saying something about that because that is pretty lame.
Yeah, I'll probably get fired for it. But go ahead, anyhow.
Yeah, piggybacking on what the other guy said. I mean, I talked to you a couple of times before about income inequality, and that's a sad reality. And I think the discussion about how much is too much, should be had. And you get these people on the sitcoms that are making $1 or $2 million per episode.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's what the free market dictates. But you have somebody making $50,000 a year, which is above the median income here in the U.S. And they can work a full 40-year career, making on average $50,000 a year, and still not even touch what some of these people are making in 1 week.
Not to mention, by the way, the hedge fund guys who make as much in 1 hour as people who work all year long make in 1 year.
Right, exactly, and I think the discussion needs to be had. I mean, the free market is just that, and if all these Ayn Randians and right wingers that say, well, the sky's the limit, and you can't regulate or put a cap on what people earn. Well, guess what? The sky does have a limit, and so. We're coming up on almost 50 years of George Harrison writing Taxman. I guess the Beatles found themselves in a 95% tax bracket, and George's crossed line was, should 5% appear too small? Be thankful I don't take it all. But, I mean, that was good. Of course, that was back in the 60s, and they were making phenomenal money. And George Harrison, in a later interview, before he died, said he kind of regretted that because it made him appear greedy. And, there's...
Well, I mean, and there's also John Lennon with that ridiculous song, Imagine There's No Money. Here's a guy he wrote that song in a place called the Dakota, which is one of the most famous apartment buildings in New York City.
Right.
It's a place where the richest people, once upon a time, no more, but at the time he wrote it in the 80s, or rather, I guess in the 70s, the richest people in New York lived in this place. He and his wife, Yoko, had bought 5 apartments that had about 25 rooms in there. The guy was one of the richest musicians in the history of music, and he's writing a song, Imagine There's No Money. I had to sort of snort every time I heard that song.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy's high on heroin, so he could write a song like that,
Yeah, right. But, I came up with like this metaphor about the game of Monopoly and kind of where we're at as a country. And, I think it has like a connection to the real world. And a lot of people could, argue, say that it was like one of the earliest fantasy or role-playing games, because it gained really wide popularity back in the 30s, at the height of the Depression, where, the object of that game, though, is to amass the most wealth while simultaneously driving everybody else into bankruptcy.
That's Monopoly. Monopoly, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, most people understand the game or have played it a couple of times or whatever, but, it just, that game became really popular after, unchecked wealth and unregulated banking and, drove the country into the Great Depression. But, the metaphorical connection is most people that have played the game realize after a few turns into that game, you realize who the haves are and the have-nots are. And then pretty soon, the wealth gets shifted into one or two players, and then eventually, if the game goes according to plan, everyone else gets driven into bankruptcy. And I mean, that's the object. But it seems like, some of these big businesses and, people that are running them, they're playing that game, but they're playing it for real. And the people that are being driven into bankruptcy, it's like, the rest of the players are just kind of going around the board and running the gauntlet. I mean, they're just in it for survival.
Yeah, and in real life in this country, every time you pass go, they take $200 from you. They don't give you $200.
Yeah,
when I played Monopoly, and ever they made me the banker, I just gave myself more money. So I was prophetic. I was ahead of my time.
Banker.
I was ahead of my time, and I knew what I was doing.
You're a real banker. You're a role model.
Yeah, when I ran out of money, I gave myself more.
There you go.
I was the Federal Reserve,
Yeah, right. You're your own little Alan Greenspan around, drafting up the rules.
The first point you made when you in the beginning of the call is an essential point. This is our country, right? This is our country. There is no law. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that we can't put a cap on what people earn and that we can't equalize the income in this country. There is no law. People think there is because in this country, capitalism is a religion, right? And free market means people would die rather than not have a free market. In fact, we make the laws. The people of the United States elect people, and they make the laws. We can vote for people. We can demand that they stop people's income at $1 million a year, that we make the taxes, as they once were, 75 or 80 or 90% above $1 million. We can change that. It doesn't have to be that way.
Well, I think that that is kind of putting a stifling cap on it. In other words, I agree with setting the limit, an arbitrary line somewhere. But I mean, what George Harrison was referring to about should 5% appear too small, be thankful I don't take it all. Just have a much, much more progressive tax base. In other words,
right.
Great. If you're making $2-3 million a year, awesome, good for you, you made it. Or more than that, or like you referred to, hedge fund managers that are making $200 million a year. After a while, I think Reagan, I guess, rolled the tax rate back from the highest earners from 39 back to 30, and Clinton, and unfortunately, I think the government shouldn't be allowed to take, say, more than 49% of your income, but I believe that anybody making over, say, $2 or $3 million a year should be in that that tax bracket.
Well, I mean, I would certainly
on earnings, but you're also making a much more progressive and a much fairer tax code.
Well, at the height of the prosperity of the middle class, and for workers and for almost everybody in this country, which was in the 40s and the 50s, especially in the 50s, the top tax bracket under a Republican president, over I think it was $1 million, was 90%, and nobody minded, and nobody made a big deal about it, and everybody was doing okay. You know what? I think what we have to do in this country, the people of the United States, and I keep saying that because they're the ones who are disenfranchised. It's only the rich who own the country and run the country. The people of the United States have to decide, as a people, are we here in this country? Have we formed a country? Do we have a society which is dedicated to doing the most for ourselves and making as much as we can for ourselves and not caring about other people? Or are we in this for other people? Are we in it just for ourselves? Or are we in it for other people? We have to make up our minds because, it's going the wrong way. I should take some other calls.
Okay, man.
Okay.
Well, keep doing what you do, Mike. Keep doing it.
Thanks for calling. Yeah, I will, unless somebody, shoves me out of here. Go ahead. What do we have? Robert in Tennessee. Hey, Bob.
Hey, Mike. How are you?
All right.
I don't want to talk about money. I don't have to talk about money, do I?
No. No,
Martin Luther King is what I want to talk to you about.
Yeah, go ahead. Do it.
It's a great speech, no doubt, but as far as the I Have a Dream speech, here's what I want to say to you, and I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I got it as far as that speech goes. I got it a long time ago. Eloquent, articulate, wonderful speech. But I think Martin Luther King, were he alive or able to communicate with us somehow, would say, enough about me, man. Y'all got to get going.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think we look back too much, man. Martin Luther King Jr. was not admired by everyone in the civil rights movement. Those on his side are the right side of the civil rights movement, in my opinion, as far as his espousing of nonviolence. I grew up in the area of Nashville where famously in the 60s there were sit-ins at lunch counters where blacks were routinely beaten. These brave souls sat at lunch counters and the police would come in and wail on them. White civilians would wail on blacks with the police standing there not doing a damn thing about it. And people like Malcolm X would say, don't sit there, man. Stand up and beat their ass.
That's right. That's right.
Mike, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You and I we're on the same page. I'm a little bit younger than you are, but basically we're on the same page and we're out of the same era.
No, that was a big thing. I mean, you're right. That was a big thing during the civil rights movement, and it was a two-pronged thing, and it was almost a battle within the civil rights movement. But in a way, it turned out to be a good thing because on one hand, you had Martin Luther King absorbing the blows of the police, right, and showing that he could try to prevail, and he did prevail. On the other hand, you had Malcolm X, just in case nonviolence didn't work, there was the threat, and he said, I remember one thing Malcolm X said was he was talking about cops in New York City, because that's where he was, talking about the cops in New York City beating up and killing, black kids, which they still do here every once in a while. And he said this was his attitude. At the same time that Martin Luther King was making these kinds of speeches, Malcolm X was broadcasting at a local radio station in New York, the only one that would put him on, which was BAI, a Pacifica station, a non-commercial station. And he said, and I heard him say this, right? He said, he was talking about the cops who had just recently just beat up and almost killed a black kid on the street. And he said, this is what he said, and this is like 2 a.m. I'm listening to this, right? At the same time Martin Luther King was marching somewhere. Malcolm X said, he was talking about the cops. He says, if a snake bites your kid, you don't go out on the street and look for that particular snake. He said, any snake will do. And this scared the shit out of people so bad. And this guy, he had a gun. He had people who were organized. He had weapons. And this what was going on in the civil rights movement. So it was like a 1-2 punch,
Yes, I understand. I think it's the thing I would say to you about the nonviolence part is, has that really worked over time for the average black person? Of course, you're going to have people pointing, look, we've got a black person in the White House. Well, okay. But I mean, black, have they advanced with this nonviolent thing? They're going to have to start taking what has been taken from them or never given to them, or they're never going to have anything. I
think that's all part. I think obviously that's distinctly when it involves black people, absolutely. But I think it's all part of a larger group of people who are now the poor, you could call them. There's like 60, 70, 80 million people in this country are literally classified as poor, and they're black and they're white. You know what I mean?
Yeah, all you got to do is look around, man. You can see them. You just look at our society. Look how people are living. Look what they wear. Look what they drive.
Meanwhile,
they're extreme. You see them. They're in New York City.
Everywhere. And meanwhile, there's a guy. I was walking the other day. I had to go over to a doctor in Manhattan, living in a different part of Manhattan than I was, where all the doctors are in one place on Manhattan. They're sort of where the rich people are, which makes sense. Yeah. And I had to go from where I live, which is not where so many rich people are, over to where these people are with the doctors. And I passed by an apartment building, 740 Park Avenue in New York City, where David Koch lives and a guy named Steven Schwartzman. These guys, between the two of these guys, they have $60 billion. Mr. Schwartzman, who's the head of a hedge fund, has 32 rooms. 32 rooms. He has 16 bedrooms, right? And he only has a family of like 3 people. This is happening while tens of millions of people are on food stamps and don't have enough to eat. This keeps up, and if we don't have a revolution, I don't know what's going to change it. I don't know.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay. Thanks for calling.
Okay.
Who do we have? Marie in Colorado. You're on.
Oh, thanks, Mike. I want to call on behalf of the millions and millions of people who work in social services and work in nonprofits, where we've been trying for our whole careers to help folks going through difficult circumstances. Right now, the suicide rate is rapidly going up among such folks. And the sense of hopelessness, the sense of I've invested my life in what, and it doesn't seem to be doing any good. Instead, it seems to be getting worse. And I just want to, I guess, maybe I'm feeling sorry for myself because I spent my entire life in the nonprofit sector, and I invested every cent I could possibly spare in trying to help folks who are falling through the social safety net.
Mm-hmm.
And now my take-home pay is such that I can't even pay my own bills. School teachers have been doing this for years and years now. We blast them. We denigrate them every opportunity we have politically. And yet these are folks who are up until 2 and 3 in the morning working on lesson plans and grading papers. They buy their own materials. They pour their lives out for these kids, and we're crushing them. When we talk about wealth inequality, I don't know what it takes to wake up people. I don't know what it takes to wake up these incredibly wealthy folk. They live in such a willful ignorance.
Well, yeah, wait. You know what? Forget about them because they're never going to give the money back. We have to take it away from them. The people who need to wake up are all the people in the country who aren't making any money, who owe on their mortgages, who can't find jobs, and yet they think that free trade and free enterprise is a religion. They look down on employees like social service employees and teachers. Yeah. They are brainwashed by the rich. They are the people who need to wake up. The other people are awake. The rich people are very awake.
Well, I agree with that. I do think they know what they're doing. I've been called a conspiratorialist, but I honestly do believe they know precisely what they're doing.
Oh, yeah, sure.
The Council for National Policy, are you aware of that, the Council for National Policy?
Yeah, it doesn't even matter what you call it. You could call it ALEC, okay. Council for National...
Exactly. That's what it's morphed into. That started right after Nixon resigned, and I've been tracking them ever since the mid-'70s through all their different transfigurations. But their policy has absolutely worked for them. And I agree. I'm in a family of incredibly politically conservative folk, and they're all so deluded. They believe that their opportunity to become a millionaire is just around the corner. They have absolutely no idea how to make a step.
People need to be pointed.
To educate them.
That's right. People need to be pointed in the right direction. The people who are very rich, the corporations that don't pay their taxes, they are the terrorists. They are the enemy.
I agree.
The rest of us are all the same, and right and left don't make any difference anymore. It's the rich who are our enemies. They're the ones we need to go after, and we take away what they have and redistribute it.
Yeah.
I'm
sorry.
Yeah, I got to take one more call. Sure. All right, thanks for calling, Marie. Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, who do we have? Mitchell. Hey, Mitchell, how you doing?
I missed the show for a couple of weeks, and you called me Barry Goldwater. What the fuck is going on?
I changed my mind. I got a raise. I make $2 million an hour, and I've changed my entire position in 2 weeks. I sold out, man.
Well, as long as you're doing and not just talking.
I am doing. Wait, hold on a second. I just did something. Go ahead.
Okay. We don't have to get rid of capitalism per se. A cashier at Costco after 4 years makes about $43,000 a year, while they're still getting $9 an hour at Walmart. This is the problem. I mean, if we just treat people fairly and pay them fairly, and believe me, Costco's making a hell of a profit. There are examples of employers living in the capitalist system who are paying and treating their people decently. Not enough of them, unfortunately. And it's just greed. I mean, it's just out of control, unchecked greed.
So what do we do about it?
Well, I mean, look, I in Washington, ironically, they passed the bill, increasing the demanding that the minimum wage be increased for these store workers, and that affects a lot of the Walmart workers. And Walmart has threatened to move out of the city.
Now, when you say Washington, we have to make it clear that it's the Washington City Council that passed this.
Right.
Right. Not you don't mean Washington. You mean Washington City Council. Yeah.
No, the Washington, D.C.
Yeah, they said that there had to be a basic, almost double the minimum wage. A basic minimum wage is something like, I don't know, $12 or $15 an hour. So Walmart, who was going to build a big store in Washington, said, well, we're not going to do it now because you're all socialists.
And they're taking in. Yeah, I'd like for them to actually sit down and do an economic analysis of how that would impact their bottom line, and let's say it, because they're making like $500 billion a year in gross sales. I mean, so I doubt it would really put too much of a dent, in their overall bottom line, and I think that their workers would stay on longer. Well,
it used to be when things like that happened back in the day, and I'm talking about way back in the day, that massive unions and strikes would get together and force these companies to do what they should be doing. Right? This happened starting around the year 1900 and working up through the 20s, 30s, 40s, even the 50s. But for some reason, that union movement, that general mass, striking attitude doesn't exist at all anymore.
That's true, and they're trying. They're out and out killing unions across the country, and and people who are supporting this are just acting, against their own best interests. But the reality of that hasn't caught up with them yet. So I'm waiting for that to happen. I hope it happens in my lifetime. Where they finally figure out that they're supporting people and they're supporting interests that are just out to completely screw them.
Well, so that's the terribly sad but inevitable bottom line to all of these conversations is more people have to suffer even more before they wake up and say, wait a minute, it's not the left, it's not the nurses, it's not the socialists, it's not the communists, it's these rich guys who are causing all of our misery. Let us take their money and let us do something decent with us.
Well, they say, with addiction and in social ills, you have to hit rock bottom. And I think that, unfortunately, that's probably the biggest impetus for change. I wish that it had been Occupy. I wish that it had been, people like you and other,
No, I sold out. I'm gone. I'm done. I'm joining the tea. Hold on a second. Pass the tea, please. I'm through with this liberal bullshit. It doesn't pay. I don't get anything from it. My blood pressure is high. Fuck it. I'm a right winger now.
Mike, I would just love to hear you just even try to act it out for one show.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't go for 5 minutes doing that. I would fall down laughing. All right, I gotta go.
Have a wonderful week.
Okay, you too. Now I'm gonna sell out. I'm gonna come on next week for the first hour, and I'm gonna be a right winger. How hard could it be? Women, they're gays, communists. That's it. I'm done. All right. I'll see you next week. I'll be around next week. Why don't we put Ella back on? Even if it's the music.
Well, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. That's my story. Oh, that's my story. Well, I ain't got a witness, and I can't prove it. But that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.